Please rise for the Freedonian National Anthem.
Hello, my name is Cindy Yoakum. I'm a librarian at the State University of New York at Freedonia and coordinator of the annual Freedonia Marxonia. I'm here at the historic 1891 Freedonia Opera House, where we'd originally planned to hear Noah Diamond speak on October 2nd. We're not together in person this year, but we're delighted that Noah has created Home Again, the Marx Brothers in New York City, as a live streaming event from his home in Manhattan under the direction of Amanda Sisk. With thanks to the Hahn Family Freedonia Marxonia Fund and the Carnahan-Jackson Humanities Fund, both of the Freedonia College Foundation, it is my pleasure to introduce author, performer, and Marx Brothers expert, Noah Diamond.
Thank you, Cindy, and thank you everyone for tuning in tonight. Welcome to your own homes and other remote locations, and thanks for being here. Before we move on to the main stream of this evening's program, a couple of things. First of all, when the presentation is over, I'd be happy to talk a bit, take questions if you have them, and recreate something of the feeling of what this would have been like in person. So if you have questions or comments or grievances, put them in the chat on the YouTube page for this stream. We will be monitoring questions here in our Washington Heights headquarters and talk after the show. Secondly, for those of you watching live tonight, this is October 2nd, 2020, which means that 130 years ago today, on this enchanted island of Manhattan, not too many blocks from where I'm sitting right now and talking to you, a baby named Julius was born to parents named Sam and Minnie. And so here is a birthday tribute to your hero and mine. Oh, Captain, my Captain, the show is never done. A century and 30 years, an open-ended run. Ecstatic cheer and joy and fear still decorate the faces in the classroom and the bum hotel, the opera, and the races. Professor Wagstaff's lit cigar, we saw it and we dived. His Excellency's car is here. The captain has arrived. Oh, Captain, my Captain, your path was never easy. An intellect among the clowns declaiming peasy-weasy? From treading boards in villages you wished you'd never heard of, till discontent and boredom cracked the act you were a third of? Dear brother of brothers, enemy of the contrived, it's the only way to travel, boys. The captain has arrived. Oh, Captain, my Captain, voice of velvet, eyes of knowing, you gave the world such happiness. Hello, you must be glowing. But love can be elusive, and the work's the joy of others. And you always were reclusive, not effusive like your brothers. Rest easy, Dr. Hackenbush. Your patients all have thrived. The pain has faded into time. The laughter has survived.
You're supposed to brighten up a place and laugh, clown, laugh. Paint a lot of smiles around your face and laugh, clown, don't frown. Just in your best la yuba, be a pagliaccio and laugh, clown, laugh.
Brothers and New York City. What a pair of topics. But where do we begin? Well, of course, we begin on the Lower East Side, where Marxian life first crawled from the primordial ooze of New York Harbor and began its American story. Minnie Marx, who is named Minna Schoenberg, immigrates from Dornum, Germany in August of 1879 aboard the SS Rhine. She is 15 years old, traveling with her parents, Leif and Fanny, who had been itinerant entertainers in the old country. Leif had been in New York since 1877, along with Minnie's sister, Hannah, but he returned to Dornum to retrieve the rest of the family. Also traveling with them are Minnie's younger brothers, Harry and Abraham. Abraham will soon be famous as Al Sheen, vaudeville comedian. Sam Marx, who was called Simon back in Alsace-Lorraine, but known to his loved ones as Frenchie, arrives in New York in 1880, lives with a cousin on East 4th Street, 6 blocks from Minnie's family on East 10th. The neighborhood at this point is well known as Klein Deutschland, Little Germany, entering its final decades as a thriving Manhattan enclave. Fraternal organizations and beer gardens and dance halls are everywhere. The story sometimes goes that Sam and Minnie meet at a dance hall on 2nd Avenue where he's working as an instructor. Instructor yourself. So, these two immigrants meet and fall in love and are married on January 18th, 1885. They move to East 62nd Street, where Minnie gives birth to their first child, Manfred. He dies 6 months later. Over the next decade, Sam and Minnie keep having children and moving. Moving is what you do when the rent is due. By the time they land on East 93rd Street, where they manage to remain for 14 years, there are 4 young Marx Brothers, and soon there will be 5. By this time, the former farming community of Yorkville has rapidly urbanized, and it's on its way to replacing the Lower East Side as the heart of German Manhattan. 9 years later, the uptown transfer is sealed, tragically, when over 1,000 women and children from Little Germany perish in the General Slocum steamship disaster, the most lethal day in New York City history until 9/11. If the family hadn't moved uptown, it's entirely possible that history would have lost some Marx Brothers on the Slocum.
We're gonna have a good time, love me, and the world is mine. Knife and fork, a bottle and a cork, that's the way to spell New York.
It's probably true that the sons of Sam and Minnie Marx could have been born in a city other than New York. And had they grown up, the same people with the same parents in another town, it stands to reason that the character of that town would have imprinted itself on them and deeply influenced their speech and their manner and their work and their world. But as it happens, New York is Marx Brothers City. There's a tendency to think of them as Hollywood figures, certainly, and they're not the only Hollywood figures to bear the stamp of New York origins. But most of their career as a team was over before they ever made a film. Yeah, humorous, I know. And they never really became cinematic artists. Their movies are a precious record of their work as performers, and like almost all early talkies, a highly effective international delivery system for the art and attitude of Broadway. The Marx Brothers are New Yorkers, and the characters they play are New Yorkers. New York City is as profound an influence as they ever had, and it's a key to understanding them. The city is their third parent, and it molded them from wild, scrappy kids to accomplished, responsible, dignified adults. The Marx Brothers' personalities are inseparable from the early 20th century immigrant experience in New York City. The great critic Jose Solis has suggested that the tendency of the Marx Brothers characters to be bad at their jobs, not a great university president, not the best hotel manager, and this seems kind of connected with their father, the idiosyncratic tailor. It's the spirit of fake it till you make it, get by on moxie and attitude. Frenchie was a tailor because he said he was a tailor. Minnie was a theatrical manager because one day she decided that's what she was. You step off the boat in New York City, you announce with confidence that you are the thing you want to be, and then it's up to you to prove it. And it's against that backdrop that the audacity of the Marx Brothers characters comes into focus.
My name is Sammy Brown, and I just came into town. Saw your ad. Your Mr. Lee say you can make a mint on me.
What do you do?
Dance, sing.
Play a role?
Anything. Say I'm a fine for guys like you, 'cause there's nothing I can't do.
Now, there is another aspect of Marxian identity, closely connected with the city, but not always or exactly the same thing. Although, yes, we are now entering the strange rhetorical zone where New York City and Jewish are almost synonyms. Most of what we say about the Marx Brothers as New Yorkers can also be said about them as Jews. It's a seemingly incidental characteristic, but it's impossible to imagine them without it. And what we're talking about here is not Judaism, the religion. Indeed, the Marx Brothers were not particularly religious. We're talking about Jewishness, an ethnicity, and like New York City, a sensibility. It's an attitude, and it leaps out at us if we know to look for it.
How much would you say that the Marx Brothers humor is Jewish humor?
Well, it was not explicitly Jewish most of the time. This was because in Vaudeville you had to tour the entire country, and you might find yourself in a town where they'd never seen a Jewish person. In fact, we had a joke in our Vaudeville act, this must be the Far Rockaway boat, I can smell the herring. Very funny on 93rd Street.
When the Jewishness of the Marx Brothers is discussed, people tend to zero in on references, just a handful of specifically Jewish references. But we'll pass over that, because it's deeper than that. In a New York melting pot of an act like the Marx Brothers, there are as many Irish references as Jewish ones in their work, but the brothers' characters are Jewish in attitude, especially Groucho. Groucho always seems very Jewish, I suppose because Chico's character is sort of Italian, and Harpo's is sort of from another planet. We might not understand today the degree to which the ethnic identity of the Marx Brothers was a factor in how they were perceived. During their film career, which is the same timeline as the persecution of Jews in Europe, Americans did not yet perceive Jewish people as a category of white people. Beyond this famous Time magazine cover from 1932, the article itself describes Groucho as the prototype of Hebrew wisecrackers. There's a lot more to say about the Marx Brothers and Jewish identity, but that's another cup of chicken soup. For now, let's leave this subject with the words of Leo Rosten from The Joys of Yiddish. Rosten, of course, worked with Groucho on Double Dynamite.
A very large part of Jewish humor is cerebral. It is, like Shalom Aleichem, reason made mischievous, or like Groucho Marx, reason gone mad. Jewish jokes drape their laughter on logic, in despair. In nothing is Jewish psychology so vividly revealed as in Jewish jokes. The style and stance of its humor reflect a culture, I think, no less than its patterns of shame, guilt, hostility, and approval. The first riddle I ever heard, one familiar to almost every Jewish child, was propounded to me by my father. What is it that hangs on the wall, is green, and whistles? I knit my brow and thought, and in final perplexity gave up. A herring, said my father. A herring, I echoed. A herring doesn't hang on the wall. So hang it there. But a herring isn't green, I protested. Paint it. But, I sputtered, summoning all my outrage, a herring doesn't whistle. Right, smiled my father. I just put that in to make it hard.
The Marx apartment on East 93rd Street has sometimes been described as a tenement. This is not technically inaccurate. The dictionary will tell you that a tenement is a large building divided into apartments. But the word has very specific connotations, especially in New York. The images conjured up by the word tenement in this context are the photographs of Jacob Riis as presented in How the Other Half Lives. The Marxes are poor. Both parents are immigrants. Money is scarce. The apartment is crowded. But it's not how the other half lives. It's lower middle class. And as Trav SD has said, the Marxes had a secondhand piano Eddie Cantor didn't even have pants. The building at 179 East 93rd Street has changed a lot over the years, inside and out. This photo of the original stoop confirms that this is indeed the building in these early family photographs. And those windows. Those windows are the windows. And if we could go inside 179 on the top floor, we might see not only the lingering ghosts of the wild young Marx Brothers, but the actual space where young Harpo sat at the window with Grandpa Leif and learned to tell time by looking at the clock tower atop Eretz Brewery in the distance. This is where Harpo Marx made his first acquaintance with the concept of time. Eretz Brewery, erected when the Upper East Side was still a rural countryside, is why the streets of the brothers' childhood smelled like beer. The brewery dominated Yorkville for 100 years, until its demolition in the 1960s, the clock tower, where he learned to tell time, outliving Harpo by less than a decade. So here we are, folks, home again. The Marx Brothers lived here from 1895 to 1908. They walked in and out of that doorway and onto this street, 93rd Street. The numbered streets in Manhattan somehow become as evocative as the most poetic named streets. You know, this is obviously 93rd Street, even without looking at the sign. You know, the sign's kind of superfluous. Can't you just tell? It feels like 93rd Street.
My name is Reggie. I live at 179 East 93rd Street. I've been there for a long, long time. I live on the top apartment on the right in the back, which is the back half of what used to be the the Marx Brothers apartment. After the Second World War, they took all the apartments in this building and chopped them into two and made the front part of the apartment a studio, which is that window up on the right on the top. And I live in the back part of that apartment, which you can't see. And many years ago, in that front apartment used to live a little old lady that I used to help sometimes with fixing a broken chair, change the light bulb, things like that. So one day, when she was still alive, she told me a story that there was a knock at the door. And she opened the door and there was standing Groucho Marx. She was very surprised. And he said to me, "Do you mind if I come in?" And she said, "No, of course." So she said, Groucho came in, didn't say much, sat there for about 10 minutes, pulled a chair up by the window, looked out the window, and then at the end of 10 minutes said, "Thank you very much," and left. And then a few weeks later, a delivery of linoleum came with a note saying that Groucho thought the building was looking a little run down, so he was going to supply some new linoleum for the building. The current landlord renovated the building some more, ripped up that linoleum. I saved a small piece of the linoleum, Groucho's linoleum. Makes me look like a crazy person, but it was Groucho Marx.
We still don't know exactly where the cigar store was, but Harpo says it was on Lexington, and maybe if we squint at these storefronts, we can see young Harpo watching through a window, imitating the facial contortions of the cigar roller, Gookie. They went to school here at PS 86, 96th and Lexington. The school isn't here anymore, but for the most part, even when it was here, they weren't there. What were these streets like when little Marx Brothers were tearing through them like tiny Jewish tornadoes? When the whole neighborhood was Marx Brothers' playground, where they heard the German, Yiddish, Irish, and Italian dialects they would imitate on stage, and where they learned, as all New Yorkers do, to walk with purpose and confidence, even when you have neither. So, Leonard is having fun, getting in trouble, playing the piano. Adolf is doing a little bit less of all of those things. Milton and Herbert are children, and Julius is reading. He's reading Horatio Alger. Stories about scrappy city boys living in poverty who, through persistence and determination and luck, find success and wealth and happiness in the expanding frontier of American possibility.
It has been a profitable time for Julius. His excellent natural abilities, stimulated by ambition, have advanced him very considerably in the education which comes from books, while the hours spent in labor on the farm have strengthened his muscles and developed his figure so that he presents a strong contrast to the undersized and slender boy who came from the city streets.
Julius goes into showbiz first with this Horatio Alger pluck and determination, and the glamorous example of Uncle Al Sheen. Julius answers an ad in the Morning World, which doesn't exist anymore, and hardly do I. And he winds up at a rooftop audition singing Love Me and the World Is Mine right on top of 281 3rd Avenue, as discovered by Mr. Robert Bader and pointed out to us in 2014. The building where 15-year-old Groucho Marx tried out for the Leroy Trio still exists. Street level is an excellent Alsatian Bavarian restaurant called Rolf's. Now, this is a beautiful coincidence that in the location of Groucho's first audition, you can get a meal that Frenchie would have approved of. So there's a period when Julius is the one Marx brother in showbiz, with a number of vaudeville jobs, starting in 1905. Milton joins up next. He and Julius become two of the three Nightingales under the direction of Ned Wayburn. Wayburn's an important figure in vaudeville and the author of The Art of Stage Dancing, a real page-turner. But as a manager for the Marx Brothers, Wayburn is at a distinct disadvantage. He did not give birth to any of them. Minnie takes over and is determined to expand the act. With an eagle eye for theatrical ability, she conducts an exhaustive talent search of her own apartment and decides that it's time for Adolf to join the act. The four Nightingales will debut at Henderson's Music Hall, Coney Island, Brooklyn, New York City. Adolf struggles to learn the words to the old anti-slavery song, Darling Nellie Gray. Now, this hapless 20-year-old, physically ill with terror at the prospect of performing before an audience, is literally pushed on stage by his mother and advised to sing as quietly as possible. And he is soon, and forever, to be hailed as one of the great, unique geniuses of American popular culture. But he doesn't know that yet, and wouldn't believe you if you told him, and on this particular evening, he'd rather be anywhere other than Coney Island. Harpo in Harpo Speaks and Groucho in the Marx Brothers scrapbook offer contrasting testimony regarding the precise bodily function Harpo loses control of on stage at Henderson's. But he does not have a good time. Nevertheless, the act is well reviewed by Variety, except for one thing.
They are nice-looking, fresh boys, and there is a certain agreeable youthfulness about their singing. The harmony is true and appealing. The boys, however, are wasting a good deal of valuable time in the exploitation of ineffective comedy and dialogue. The talk is far from funny and makes the turns seem to lag. The greater part of it could be dropped altogether.
By 1908, the act is enough of a going concern that the Marx family relocates to Chicago. Leaving New York could not have been easy, but it did make practical sense. Chicago is the hub of small-time vaudeville, and it's equidistant from the coasts. By 1911, the Nightingales' musical act with comedy becomes the Marx Brothers' comedy act with music. By 1912, Leonard has joined his little brothers, and by 1914, the schoolroom act has evolved into something else. Home Again, written and directed by Uncle Al, is the culmination of the Marx Brothers' prehistoric act, and it's what takes them from small-time to big-time vaudeville. There is little we wouldn't give to see it. Fortunately, we do have the first-hand testimony of one little boy in the audience, a little boy who turned out to be S.J. Perlman.
The mise-en-scene was the Canard Docks in New York. Garbed in his time-honored claw-hammer coat, his eyes shifting licorishly behind his specs, and an unlit perfecto in his teeth, Groucho erupted on stage. Behind him came Gummo, impersonating his cocksure son, and Harpo and Chico, a pair of shipboard cronies. "Well, friends," he observed, stifling a belch, "next time I cross the ocean, I'll take a train. I'm certainly glad to set my feet on terra firma. Now I know that when I eat something, I won't see it again." Heckled at almost every turn by Gummo, he at length remarked waspishly, "Nowadays, you don't know how much you know until your children grow up and tell you how much you don't know." After considerable horseplay in which Harpo disgorged the entire ship's cutlery from his sleeves and inspected the lingerie of several Zoftig fellow passengers, Chico approached Groucho with hand extended. "I'd like to say goodbye to your wife," he proposed in what was unquestionably the paltriest dialect ever heard off Mulberry Street. "Who wouldn't?" riposted his brother. This boffo ushered in the second scene, laid without any tiresome logical transition at Groucho's villa on the Hudson. The plot structure, to be candid, was sheerest gossamer. Vague reference was made to a stolen chafing dish, necessitating a vigorous search by Harpo of the corsages of two showgirls drifting unaccountably about the premises. But on the whole, there were few nuances.
Although the family lived in Chicago during the home again period, the act often brought them home again. During their vaudeville years, the Marx Brothers appeared at dozens of New York City theaters. Almost all of them have been either demolished or repurposed in the last century.
Though the days are long, twilight sings a song of the happiness that used to be. And soon my eyes will close, soon I'll find repose, but in my dreams you're always near to me. I'll see you in my dreams, hold you in my dreams. Someone took you out of my arms, still I feel the thrill of your charms, lips that once were mine, tender eyes that shine, they will light my way tonight. I'll see you in my dreams. They will light my ever-loving way tonight. I'll see you in, I'll see you in, I'll see you in my dreams, in my dreams, in my dreams, in my dreams.
But the greatest of all vaudeville theaters, against all odds, still exists. It's now a Broadway theater, and it's currently being raised 30 feet in the air, believe it or not, to make room for more street-level retail. But that auditorium, still reverberating with laughter generated by the four Marx Brothers 100 years ago, continues and will continue to exist. And it is still correctly identified as the Palace. Even before they get to Broadway in the theatrical sense, the Marx Brothers are quintessentially Broadway characters, especially in their later vaudeville years, and partly through the influence of Herman Timberg. Timberg is a comedy superstar of the early 20th century who, in 1920, replaces Uncle Al as the principal behind-the-scenes creator of the Brothers Act. Timberg writes On the Mezzanine, also known as On the Balcony, and the brothers announce their intention to do away with their former characters. Now and forever, instead of playing Dutch, meaning German, or Hebrew, meaning Yiddish, Groucho will play what he is, a first-generation American wise guy. Timberg's writing is usually set within the world of New York showbiz. He loved to write about managers and critics and actors and chorus girls, and a hallmark of his writing is the use of rhyming, metered dialogue.
I want to play a dramatic part, the kind that touches a woman's heart, to make her cry for me to die. Did you ever get hit with a coconut pie?
Syncopated Broadway jazz patter. Now, the word Broadway means many things. First, Broadway is a street, and it was a street long before New York was a city.
Broadway is a product of pre-European Manhattan, and because it's been here longer than any other human-made feature of the city, it's allowed to break the rules. Broadway violates the grid, cuts an audacious diagonal up the length of the island, creating these irregular blocks. They're triangular, but we call them squares. Union Square, Madison Square, Herald Square, Times Square. And these stops along Broadway are our social and cultural hotspots even today because of where the Lenape carved a path through the woods.
Second, Broadway is a business, built around Broadway Theater, which takes place in a number of professional houses, currently 41, with 500 seats or more, located near, or in rare cases on, Broadway, between 41st and 54th Streets. And one up at Lincoln Center, I know. This Broadway is the commercial and occasionally the artistic pinnacle of theatrical art in the United States, as well as a metaphor for success and ambition. But there's another Broadway, what we might call cultural rather than religious Broadway. This Broadway refers to the entire world of Manhattan, let's say west of 6th Avenue, north of 34th Street, south of 52nd. But more specifically, not to the location, but the culture which exists there. Broadway culture encompasses not just the theater and theater people, but nightclubs and delicatessens, and in its heyday, bootleggers and speakeasies. This is Broadway as an adjective, and as a mindset, the Broadway Damon Runyon wrote about. In Guys and Dolls, Sergeant Sarah Brown is not looking for some fly-by-night Broadway romance. In Runyon's A Very Honorable Guy, the gang leader known as the Brain, who is based on Arnold Rothstein, declares of a fella named Feet Samuels, his credit is ruined forever on Broadway, meaning not in the theater, but in Midtown Manhattan, which to these Guys and Dolls is the world. The Marx Brothers were deeply connected to this Broadway. They were denizens of it, or in Runyon's word, citizens, until the day they left for Hollywood, and they remained Broadway characters forevermore in life and in art. Some of their early works are explicitly set in the milieu of Broadway, On the Mezzanine. I'll say she is. The action of Coconuts and Animal Crackers takes place outside the city, but Broadway is still the true setting of those plays, as well as their language and attitude and point of view. Monkey Business is about 4 Broadway characters who stow away on an ocean liner and get mixed up with some archetypal Broadway gangsters. there is a term for what these characters are, and although this term does not appear in the Marx canon, I snuck it into my adaptation of I'll Say She Is.
Oh, I know, she says he was Broadway riffraff.
Broadway riffraff. That's what we're dealing with here, folks. Ragamuffins, lowlifes, street corner vulgarians who are 10 times smarter, quicker, more resourceful, and more sophisticated than the sophisticates they rankle. Leo Lindemann's Delicatessen, in its original location on Broadway between 49th and 50th, is the unofficial headquarters of the Broadway we're talking about. This is how Harpo describes Lindy's in his book.
I had a home again. I was back with my own people who spoke my language, with my accent. Card players, horse players, bookies, song pluggers, agents, actors out of work, and actors playing the palace. Al Jolson with his mob of fans, and Arnold Rothstein with his mob of runners and flunkies. The cheesecake was ambrosia. The talk was old, familiar music. A lot of yucks. A lot of action. Home, sweet home.
I'll Say She Is, The Coconuts, and Animal Crackers comprise the classic Broadway trilogy which contains the essence of the Marx Brothers. These masterworks, of course, ran in beautiful and historic New York theaters, the Casino, the Lyric, and the 44th Street. It will sadden but not surprise you to hear that all three are gone. Well, the interior of the Lyric is gone, but the facades on 43rd Street and 42nd Street are original. It's also once again called the Lyric Theater after years of being called all kinds of things. So this is very much the view from the street that the Marx Brothers and their collaborators and their audiences would have had on their way in to the original Broadway Coconuts. I wonder if Groucho, at this fairly early moment in his love affair with the Savoy operas, ever noticed that 2 of the 3 busts decorating the 43rd Street facade are Gilbert and Sullivan. The third, if you must know, is the composer Reginald de Koven. 1 block uptown, the 44th Street Theater was an appropriate home for Animal Crackers because it had opened in 1912 as the Weber and Fields Music Hall. Today, the only trace of this place on 44th Street is a plaque commemorating the nightclub in its basement, which during World War II was an Allied Forces entertainment venue operated by the American Theater Wing and known as the Stage Door Canteen. Now, there is a 1943 film about the Stage Door Canteen, and it does include this.
Hey! Take your hat off. Can't you see the ladies? Come back there. Come on, take it off.
But sadly, these 30 seconds of footage do not constitute a return engagement for Harpo at the 44th Street Theater, because the movie was filmed on some other coast somewhere. However, Harpo had returned to the 44th Street Theater for an appearance in the Friars' Frolic in 1934. So at least we have that to hang on to. But who are we kidding? You know what I want to talk about. The Casino Theater, Broadway and 39th, is already an old house when the brothers arrive in I'll Say She Is in 1924. Built in 1882, it's the first Broadway theater in what is now the Theater District, and the first to be lit by electricity. It had the first public roof garden in Manhattan, and in 1894, it's the home of the Schuberts' passing show, perhaps the first Broadway review. In 1898, It's the first Broadway theater to present a musical written by Black Americans, Clarindy, by Paul Laurence Dunbar and Will Marion. In 1900, Floridora at the Casino tantalizes Broadway with the first modern chorus line. In its midst is Evelyn Nesbit. This is where Stanford White first saw her. And if you think I'm going to get into that, but let's spend a minute in this beautiful old house.
That Broadway music, a palpable rage. It's the sun and the stars and the moon. That Broadway music, it's more than a stage. It's the age of the tin and tune. We'll have some thrill along forever, long as the lights of Broadway shine. When you're out of the money, just say something funny, or get up and dance in a line. Honey and Robert will give you a sign.
Here I am with some of my brothers and sisters from the 2016 cast of I'll Say She Is, posing in the former location of the casino on the 92nd anniversary of the original Broadway opening, May 19th, 2016. From left to right, Matt Walters, some bum who thinks he's Groucho Marx, Melody Jane, Kathy Beale, Seth Sheldon, and Matt Roper. And here are Seth and Matt rehearsing the tramp ballet from I'll Say She Is, In the Footsteps of Greatness.
They are gentlemen of infinite jest, and they turn what is intrinsically a 10-cent show into a masterpiece of knock 'em down and drag 'em out humor. They will doubtless soon be hailed by the younger generation as greater geniuses than Michelangelo and Beethoven.
You bet your life. We can't blame the loss of the casino on the decrepitude of the 1970s or the Disneyfication of the 1990s. It's an early casualty of the expanding garment district, demolished in 1930, the same year the Marx Brothers moved to Hollywood. So they never had the opportunity to revisit the casino. However, when they played the casino, Groucho was revisiting Broadway and 39th Street. Diehards will recall that in 1906, an event on this corner featured 15-year-old Julius Marx as a solo vocalist with Gus Edwards' Postal Telegraph Boys.
The truth is, our career mostly took place on the stage. We were touring in Vaudeville. My first job was 1905. In fact, I remember in 1906 performing at a benefit for the victims of the San Francisco earthquake at the Metropolitan Opera House. I mean, the benefit was at the Opera House, not the earthquake. By far the largest and classiest room I had ever played.
Well, that would have been the original Metropolitan Opera House, which was diagonally across the intersection from the casino at Broadway and 39th Street. This building behind me, that's the office building that replaced the original Met in 1967. And the casino stood on the opposite corner, right over there.
Somebody's sweetheart I want to be.
But it's hard to believe that during his Opera House experience, Julius didn't, at some point, gaze across the intersection at the most arresting and picturesque thing in the area, and at least think to himself, my, what a beautiful theater. But if you're ever traveling through time and you find yourself here on the date that Julius sings Somebody's Sweetheart I Want to Be at the Metropolitan Opera House, right here, resist the temptation to meddle with the fabric of time. Don't go over to that little boy and tell him that in less than 2 decades, he will be the toast of Broadway right across the street. The Broadway period marks the beginning of the Marx Brothers as a fixture of creative and intellectual life in the United States. This is largely due to the influence of a circle of writers and critics in the habit of getting together for lunch at the next great New York City landmark on our tour, and this one still exists, the Algonquin Hotel, although we are all nervous about the renovation. When the Marx Brothers, especially Harpo, enter the world of the Algonquin Round Table, they meet some of the most important figures in their story. Alexander Woollcott, who wrote the crucial opening night review of I'll Say She Is. George S. Kaufman, who would co-write 3 of the brothers' best scripts. Herman J. Mankiewicz, who would produce some of their best films. But every member of the Round Table was brilliant and accomplished and had some connection to the Marx Brothers.
Sir, one of our elevator men has called my attention to your article in the Herald or Tribune or something, in which you declare that Mr. Julius H. Marx looks like me. Now, Mr. Hammond, I happen to be present also at the opening of I'll Say She Is, and I want to say that if you think Mr. Marx looks like me, then you are even crazier than I have always thought, and I would not like to have my good opinion of you disproved. In the first place, Mr. Marx is just a wee bit terrible looking, and I have had some very favorable comments on my looks from time to time, not even counting those from people who it turned out afterward were speaking of Mr. S.J. Kaufman. Also, Mr. Marx wears a black mustache, and you can appoint one person, and I will appoint one, and together they will pick a third impartial one, and they can search high and low on me without finding a mustache of any color.
There is no wincing possible at the pantomime of Mr. Arthur Marx. It is 110 proof artistry. To watch him during the deluge of knives and forks from his coat sleeve, or in the poker game where he wets one thumb and picks the card off with the other, or, at any moment during the show, is to feel a glow at being alive in the same generation.
Dear Harpo, it was 10 years ago this evening that, thanks to an accidental detour to the casino, I first laid eyes upon you. No other accident I have ever been involved in has contributed so much to my enjoyment of this world. I love you dearly, and think the chances are that I will continue to do so until one of us dies. After you, Alphonse.
The Round Table spawns the Essential City periodical, the New Yorker magazine, founded by Harold Ross and Jane Grant, and in its early days written largely by members of the Round Table, also counted Groucho among its earliest contributors. And here we are at an Algonquin event, posing before the famous painting by Natalie Asencios. And now that Harpo that summer begins palling around with the literary set, a running gag begins to run through all of the New York papers all throughout that summer, characterizing Harpo as the brains of the Marx Brothers. And Harpo played that role for all it was worth. He told the New York Review that the green hat by Michael Arlen was glittering but a trifle ostentatious. He tells the Evening Post, I read in my dressing room, and my 3 brothers, who are not studious like I am, interrupt and try to keep me from being the brains of the Marx Brothers. Groucho, having had just about enough of this, fires off a message to Woollcott for his column. There is no brains in the Marx family. And if there was, it certainly wouldn't be Harpo. He was seriously thinking of marrying his first grade teacher because they had been together for 6 years. The Broadway period provides the Marx Brothers with the last few ingredients required for their greatness: first-rate writers and the greatest scene partner in the history of comedy, the former Daisy Juliet Baker, Margaret Dumont. The character she played had existed in embryonic form in earlier Marxian efforts, but what Margaret Dumont did was, in the truest sense of the word, unique. She was, after all, a Marx brother. The arrival of the brothers on Broadway is also a return to Marx Brothers City. Their desire by the early 20s to transcend vaudeville and succeed on Broadway, it wasn't only, or even mainly, about wanting to be rich and famous. It was about wanting to be home again after 20 years on the road. As I'll Say She Is settled into its run at the casino, the Marxes settled back into life in New York. Harpo found a place in Midtown, Chico and Zeppo in Richmond Hill, Queens, near Sam and Minnie, and before moving out to Great Neck, Long Island, Groucho lived in this building, right here in Washington Heights, very close to where I'm sitting now.
And now, if you've got a key you aren't using... Quiet, please. A man sat by the fireplace. The fire, it was out. It was out because the logs were soaking wet. He thought of days when he sat on his mother's knee, which, by the way, was also soaking wet.
The Marx Brothers' success on Broadway conveniently coincides with the dawn of talkies. Their first two films really belong to their Broadway period. Not only are they adapted from Broadway shows, they were filmed in New York City at Paramount's studio in Astoria, Queens. While the brothers were filming Coconuts during the day and early in the morning, they were still appearing on Broadway in Animal Crackers at night. Those are the Broadway Marx Brothers in that movie. Groucho accidentally starts to call Chico Ravelli a couple of times in the Coconuts film because he was calling him that every night on stage. The Coconuts movie is an archival treasure on many levels, maybe the first musical talkie, depending on how you define talkie and musical and first, pre-Busby Berkeleyism, primitive microphones and soaking wet paper. And Groucho's spoken performance is, among other things, the best available record of first-generation American Jewish New York speech. After 20 years in vaudeville and 5 on Broadway, the Marx Brothers were now to be seen and heard by an exponentially bigger audience. Now they would be everywhere, doing Coconuts forever. And compare that sound with the stilted mid-Atlantic line readings in early talkies. Here was the revolution. For the first time, it was available in big cities and small towns all at once. A gift from New York City to the world, an American music as distinct and expressive as Gershwin's.
Singing, dancing, and entertainment. After the entertainment, there'll be
your eyes.
No lots sold.
They shine like the pants in the blue suit.
What the folks? Sunshine you want? What do you want? Sunshine all the year.
You know that suitcase is empty?
Let's go ahead and say nothing happens. Right this way. You're just an idle rumor. Friends, you and I will walk right into that. Think of the opportunities here in Florida. 3 years ago, I came to Florida without a nickel in my pocket. This is the heart of residential district. Every lot is the stones thrown from the station. They throw enough stones, you never got double pneumonia. The next time I see you, remind me not to talk to you, will you?
The beginning of a film career is not the most dramatic change the brothers experience in 1929. In fact, it only might be in the top 3. Although I don't think he ever said so directly. I wonder if the depression and insomnia that Groucho begins to experience in the fall of 29 can be traced not only to the stock market crash, but to another event, which happened 1 month earlier.
Last week, the Marx Brothers buried their mother. On the preceding Friday night, more from gregariousness than from appetite, she had eaten 2 dinners instead of the conventional one, and after finishing off with a brief, hilarious game of ping pong, was homeward bound across the Queensboro Bridge, when paralysis seized her. Within an hour, she was dead in her Harpo's arms. Minnie Marx was in this world 65 years and lived all 65 of them.
The Marx Brothers moved to Hollywood to make Monkey Business in 1931. The excellence of their first 3 Hollywood films proves that their genius and vitality were not lost in the move. But after those 3, and perhaps the next one too, the brothers' career seems to support Jerry Seinfeld's observation that in New York, you get a little more funny every year. Well, Groucho was plenty funny on You Bet Your Life, and he hadn't lived in New York in 20 years. But for the team and the endlessly fascinating question of their decline, let's not discount the fact that the Marxes were separated from an important wellspring of their comedy. Anarchic wit breeds in the narrow, crowded, incandescent-lit passageways of the city. We understand the Marx Brothers as an urban force, pushing their way through the crowd to be the loudest voices in the throng. New York City remained ever present in their work. About half of their films are explicitly set in or near New York City, at least in part. But all of them contain references to New York or demonstrations of New Yorkism, and of course the Marx Brothers themselves, who are as New York as the Manhattan skyline. There were plenty of visits home again after they decided to go west rather than remain at the circus of life in New York City, but they could have done more. At any time, they could have gone back to New York and starred in a Broadway show, but they were not that hungry. They were happy, except for Groucho, and they were comfortable, except for Chico. The will to power through 8 shows a week was behind them. In the late 20th century, the tragedy of the human condition causes the world to lose its brothers, at least in their corporeal form. Zeppo, Gummo, and prominently Groucho lived to see the 1970s and the storied Marx Brothers Renaissance of that time. Groucho spends time in New York in connection with the 1970 Broadway production of Minnie's Boys. He lavishly praises the performance of the great Louis J. Stadlin and signs a letter enclosed in every playbill during previews. The letter explains that since the show is in previews, the audience is not really in New York, but in Philadelphia. If it has a few rough spots, we feel you'll be willing to overlook them out of gratitude for not having to live in Philadelphia. Groucho has another memorable New York experience at the chaotic 1974 re-premiere of the film Animal Crackers at the Sutton Theater. And he visits New York in his later years, staying at the Sherry Netherland Hotel. Here is Charlotte Chandler's description of a walk with Groucho on Fifth Avenue in 1975.
During the walk up Fifth Avenue from 59th Street, almost everyone we passed looked at Groucho with an expression of pleasant recognition. Taxi drivers shouted out, "Hi, Groucho! Be well, Groucho!" He autographed some Wall Street journals and a few copies of the New York Times, some assorted business cards, and a few used envelopes, as well as one leather briefcase which didn't take the ink very well. One fan raced to the Rizzoli bookstore and then caught up with us with a paperback copy of the Groucho letters, which he breathlessly held out for Groucho's signature. He took the book and signed it, and the boy thanked him. "Nothing at all," Groucho responded. "It makes the book worth less."
But the watershed New York City event of the Living Legend period is his 1972 performance at Carnegie Hall, forever known to fans by the title of its record, An Evening with Groucho. The LP is really an edit incorporating parts of 2 different performances. One was Carnegie Hall, and the other was at Iowa State University. Nevertheless, the evening of the title, the validating career milestone, was obviously Carnegie Hall. Just 36 blocks, less than 2 miles from the boyhood stoop of 93rd Street. But in those 36 blocks is the adventure of a lifetime.
London is satisfied, Paris is resigned, but New York is always hopeful. Always it believes that something good is about to come off, and it must hurry to meet it. Other places may give you a sweet and soothing sense of level, but in New York there is always the feeling of something's going to happen. It isn't peace, but you know, you do get used to peace, and so quickly. And you never get used to New York.
The afterlife of the Marx Brothers has largely taken place in New York City, where the number of Marxian projects and events in the 5 boroughs since 1977 is impossible to count, and growing all the time.
Well, looks like I'm off again. The Russians are in full retreat and I'm right in front of them.
Oh, Napoleon, when you're away at night, I do nothing but toss and turn.
I don't mind the tossing, but cut out the turning. Well, farewell, Josephine. Caesar had his Brutus, Charles had Cromwell, and I've got rhythm. Whoopee! Tomorrow he's not wearing anything, so get your tickets early.
Did he go? Anybody.
You know, I wish you wouldn't open sardines with my sword. My infantry is beginning to smell like the Lenox Avenue local.
Looking for something?
My sword.
There it is, my darling.
Ah, yes, I see the point. You're not getting your money back.
Sure, he's gone.
Yes, he kissed me goodbye.
You know, I wish you wouldn't open sardines with my sword. Oh, no, we had that, didn't we? Vive la France!
Vive la France!
Vive la France!
It's women like you that make men like me like women like you. Your eyes, Joe. They shine like the pants of a blue suede suit.
For it's a Napoleon scene.
For me, one of the things that makes New York City feel like home is the magical sense that the Marx Brothers are here, that it's their city and they are its sons. And that sense of hope, that sense of running, rushing to meet something good that Dorothy Parker was writing about, that too seems like a Marx Brothers feeling, even though it's so sentimental. You know, when writing and talking about the Marx Brothers, I often find myself making this point.
One of the great paradoxes of the Marx Brothers is that they were the most unsentimental artists. And in their great works, you never catch them asking for your sympathy. And yet, we who love the Marx Brothers, and I know there's a lot of us here tonight, fellow citizens of Freedonia, graduates of Huxley College, patients of Standish Sanitarium, welcome. We love the Marx Brothers sentimentally and passionately and with all our hearts.
But like many aspects of my deepening understanding of the Marx Brothers over the last decade, the answer to this question didn't really become clear until I discussed it with Kathy Beale. This is what Kathy said. Their motivation is joy. Marxian behavior, even at its most aggressive and destructive, is an expression of joy. That's why we love them the way we do. Their treatment of Margaret Dumont and other authority figures, it may be disrespectful, but it's not angry. It's really not about sticking it to the man as much as we would sometimes like it to be. Their comedy is anarchic, their characters are vehement, but they're not enraged revolutionaries. They're euphoric revolutionaries, and their darkness is only a parody of darkness. They do what they do for fun. Their motivation is joy. And maybe it's the profundity of the word brothers, or the sound of their voices, the way they speak to us, or don't speak to us. But just as the Marx Brothers have always felt like family, New York has always felt like home. We're going to Queens.
Oh, the desert is the place that you desire. desire, and nevermore will you go.
So throw another cowboy on the fire and tell them that I'm coming home. I thought I'd never get home. Yippee-ki-doodle, Yankee Doodle, I love you. Oh, the little man.
Well, here I am with my Marx brother, Seth. We are in a Marxian location neither of us has visited before, at Mount Carmel Cemetery in Queens. And we're going to visit Sam and Minnie. Hey, look, Gottlieb.
Mr. Gottlieb?
Ah.
Oh, wow. They are quite close.
When they came back here, I found in Frenchie's New York Times obituary, it says that Zeppo is on his way to New York and that Groucho and Harpo are already in New York. So they were here. It's one thing, there's lots of places in the city where you can say, oh, the Marx Brothers stood here, you know, at the Palace or something. But I mean, they stood here at two, you know, devastating moments in their lives.
4 years apart.
4 years apart. There are bones in the ground here that crossed the ocean and came to New York. Mm-hmm. Stood in the wings in all those theaters.
Mm-hmm. Laughed in the seats to get other people to start laughing.
To start laughs, yeah. I assume Gummo was responsible for making the arrangements for funerals and burials and all that kind of family business.
Why? Because he was the manager, or what?
Yeah, he was the manager, and yeah, in a Jewish family, the agent makes all the funeral arrangements. Right. No, but I think he was I think that was his role in the family. He replaced Minnie as the mother figure. Mm-hmm. It's nice, isn't it, that Sam and Minnie's favorite song is blasting from a car.
It's part of the perpetual care plan. The other day, because I've been hanging out a lot by Greenwood, I went to go see the Leonard Bernstein's grave.
Oh, yeah.
Leonard Bernstein, you know, my dad and my mom performed for Leonard Bernstein. So, like, I brought my mom to go visit his grave there. His is a little more elaborate than what we have here, the Marxists. But compared to what else you see in Greenwood, these castles and really, like I think in New York, you're going around some of those mausoleums and you're like, I could actually live here. It's nicer than my apartment.
Yeah, it's more spacious than my apartment.
You know, it's quite notable that his is, you know, a little family plot and well taken care of, and a bench under a tree.
Nice.
You know, yeah.
It's nice to see that there are stones on the grave.
Hmm. Yeah, this is interesting. The Talmud mentions that after a person dies, their soul continues to dwell for a while in the grave where they're buried. Putting stones on a grave keeps the soul down in the world. In this world, rather, from, I guess, going up or elsewhere. And a related interpretation suggests that the stones keep demons and golems from getting into the graves.
There is a lizard on the Marx family grave.
That's Chico's demon.
It's Chico in his reptile form.
Now be a snake.
I don't know how to be a snake.
It's like a worm, but more.
Thank you, Minnie, Frenchie, for everything.
Not the tailoring.
Except the tailoring.
Either this is real or it's a beautiful dream. We're sitting on a rainbow eating peaches and cream. If only the dream would last.
I'm lighter than a feather, full of get up and go. You and me together, that's a heck of a show. Next thing you know, it's almost past. When shadows fall and stretch across September, when hope's an ember, then we'll remember we had a ball, and who could ask for more
than the time we spent in 1924.
When shadows fall and all the fun has faded, please don't be jaded, keep the past inside. We're in love, we're in electric light. Even Broadway's just for us tonight.
When shadows fall and colder winds are blowing, when tears are flowing, we'll wake up knowing we did it all. So darling, don't be still. Let's go find the thrones, the stars, the songs, the thrill. When shadows fall out of love for one another, brother to brother is bright enough to see. We're alive, and what a thing to be.
Baby, Broadway's just for you and me.
Thank you to everybody who watched live tonight, and even if you didn't watch live, thank you for watching. Thank you, Cindy Yoakum, Barbara Yoakum, Rick Davis, all my friends in Freedonia, the 1891 Freedonia Opera House Performing Arts Center, and the SUNY Freedonia Daniel A. Reed Library. Thank you, Andy Marx, for a beautiful performance, everyone who contributed voice work and artwork to the evening. Thank you. Robert Bader, thank you for answers to questions. Marx Brothers Council, Village of Freedonia, New York City, I love you. Amanda, I love you way more even than I love all that other stuff. I'll meet you here in a few seconds for the Q&A. And thanks again, folks, and happy birthday, Grouch.
One of the great paradoxes.
Well, we had some nice technical bugs at the very end there, but what you would have seen is the Freedonia Marxonia URL, followed by my very hard to imagine URL, noahdiamond.com. But perhaps you get the idea. Hey, we did it, folks. We did it. Thanks for sticking with us. I'm going to navigate over into the chat and see if anybody's talking. People are talking. Oh, this is just lovely to read, although perhaps not that interesting for me to read it on camera while you watch. I also think there's a little bit of a lag here, and I just finished the presentation, but you're probably still watching the final maybe minute of it. So if you have questions or comments or birthday wishes for Groucho or anything you'd like to add to the evening, just send it along in the chat. Oh, this is lovely. Anthony Miranda says, the love in your eyes is amazing when talking about them. I do love them. I think it's safe to say. Thanks for your message earlier today on Facebook, too. The Mariposa Symphony Orchestra, which is a pseudonym for Mr. Les Marsden, says, wonderful VO work by everyone. Those performances brought the many friends and family to life, vividly, with veracity and great understanding of the sources. That is true. We were so lucky that so many people were eager and willing to contribute little pieces to it, and it makes it feel like a group event rather than the kind of isolation we've gotten used to in quarantine.
Have you ever been to Groucho's grave or the other brothers?
Have I ever?
In the Groucho's grave or the other brothers?
Oh, there's a question. Yes, the beautiful Amanda behind the curtain has just been bringing questions to me too. One question was, have I ever been to Groucho's grave? The answer is no, or any of the other brothers. The reason for that is I have spent very little time on the West Coast. It's been on my list forever. I have many friends out there I would like to see, and Marx Brothers stuff to do on the West Coast too. But I've only spent 10 days in LA in 2008 working on a play with my good friend Corey Musa. So I didn't have time for any of that. Someday, though, yes, I would love to go to California, see Groucho's grave, or where his ashes are interred. Harpo's ashes were sprinkled on a golf course in California, which is lovely. We could visit that golf course. Yes?
When was the first time you put on a mustache and held a cigar and said you were Groucho?
The question is, when was the first time I painted on a mustache or held a cigar and impersonated Groucho? I must have been something like 10 years old. That's when I first started seeing the movies and being able to do something like that. I remember very specifically that it was my mother's eyebrow pencil and that I took it, I think, without permission. And, you know, there's a tendency of preteens and teens to lock themselves in the bathroom for a lot of secret activity. I'm a little sorry to tell you that was mine, principally. You better not be putting on grease paint in there. I guess the cigars came later. But I actually do remember rolling up a fake cigar using some kind of packing tape. I'm sure that was a great thing to put in my mouth when I was 10. Is Astoria Studios still standing? Yes, it is. And it is still functional as a studio. And it's also part of the Museum of the Moving Image out in Astoria, Queens. And as soon as being out and about comes back in style, that's a good trip to take. I'd love to do some more Marx Brothers tours, maybe next summer, if that kind of thing is going on. And a more extended tour that went into the other boroughs could certainly include Astoria. All right, here we go. Gummo and Chico, where are they buried? And is it the same mausoleum? No, but I should have the correct answer right at hand, and I don't. My understanding is Gummo and Zeppo are both... Oh, Gummo and Chico is the question. That they are in California, but I'm not sure why. Groucho is, I know, at, I think it's called Eden Park Memorial Cemetery. Yeah, but, you know, the next time I'm on the West Coast, I probably will do what I've been doing in New York and just make the rounds and see all the Marx stuff that I can and visit all the Marx people that I can. So if any of my West Coast California Marx Brothers friends are listening right now, can I stay with you? And thanks for tolerating my good-natured New York chauvinist jabs at the West Coast tonight. Who introduced you? Oh, at the beginning of the program tonight, I was introduced by Cindy Yoakum. Cindy Yoakum is actually responsible for everything that you've seen tonight. She is a wonderful, remarkable person and a terrific friend who I've gotten to know in the course of all these Marx Brothers adventures. She is a reference librarian at the Reed Library at SUNY Freedonia. She's responsible for coordinating the festival every year. She just pours so much effort and love into it. I relate to that. It's just the urge to keep working on a little project and tweaking it until You know, I was editing this thing right up until we started streaming, and Cindy and I are kindred spirits that way. So you really do have Cindy Yoakum to thank. And I should also add that the Freedonia Marxonia Festival in Freedonia is wonderful. And when it's happening again, I assume next year, we should all go. We should caravan up to Freedonia because it's a lovely little town. The Opera House is beautiful and historic. And we should spend some time there, hopefully next year. Let's see. Is there a Marx Brothers collectibles book? There are some in terms of like visual coffee table books. The Marx Brothers scrapbook is kind of that. The Groucho file is a little bit more that. Frank Ferrante and Arthur Marx released a book called Groucho, A Photographic Journey that has very beautiful, large reproductions of some of Arthur's photos. And then there's Art Ducko, a very limited edition by Daniel Kinski, which came out last year or the year before, and which is also packed with visuals. But I feel that the great Marx Brothers coffee table book is still to come. And that there definitely should be more and more of that. What movie would you like to adapt for a play? That's a question. If the question is which Marx Brothers movie, the answer to that is indirectly Duck Soup. We did, I'll say she is brothers and sisters and I did a reading at Marx Brothers Weekend on Governor's Island in 2017. I'm sure some of those listening and watching right now were probably there. That was arranged by the great Kevin Fitzpatrick, who is also responsible for Marxfest and everything Dorothy Parker and Algonquin Round Table. Marx Brothers Weekend, we did a reading of Cracked Ice, which was the rough draft of Duck Soup. And I like the idea of taking that early draft of Duck Soup and trying to do it as a stage piece. I haven't given it much thought. I don't know if it ever would or could happen, but that leaps to mind, certainly. Well, there's a question. Will I'll Say She Is be revived? Will it be revived and filmed? You know, I love this question because it indicates that people would like to see I'll Say She Is again. I certainly would like to do it again, perhaps forever. And I know many of the people who have worked on it feel the same way. But one thing I kind of regret about this question is the answer, because it's such a prosaic answer. It's just money. You know, that's what it takes to make these things happen. And I don't mean money for me, but just for the show. We haven't made a penny on I'll Say She Is. Amanda and I always wind up waiving our fees so that we can spend it making the show better. But that's what it is. Even the way we produce theater, it's expensive. We produced the off-Broadway nonprofit production in 2016 for less than $100,000. And it's not a small show. It's a big show. And even if you pare it down as much as you can, it still takes an awful lot of capital. So that's what it is. I do think the show has immense commercial potential to make money back, but that's what we're waiting for. And right now, of course, all of theater is in a sort of existential crisis. And so any plans to bring I'll Say She Is back or do anything on stage are as indefinite as they ever could be. But I will tell you, if it's at all possible, if I have anything to say about it, yes, we will bring I'll Say She Is back. Here's a nice question from my friend Tom Hamill. Tom Hamill thinks that I should promote my book. But the problem is I have 3 books, and Tom isn't being specific about which one he wants me to promote. So he leaves me no choice. Probably of most interest to the crowd watching now is Gimme a Thrill. This is the story of I'll Say She Is, the original production and the 2014 Fringe Festival revival. I still have yet to update it with information about the 2016 off-Broadway version. But I put this book together in between the 2 productions, so maybe when there are plans for the next production, that's when I will update this. But even in its 2014 form, I think you'll like this. If you're into this stuff, it's the most complete history available of the original production, and there's lots of new stuff in it. give me a thrill. And I'll do this quickly. But I also have 2 other books. 400 Years in Manhattan is a history of New York City based on the stage show that Amanda and I presented at the United Solo Festival last year. It's inspired by my long erstwhile career as a New York City tour guide. And it's a very visual book. It's full of great New York City pictures. A certain amount of what you saw tonight also kind of came from 400 Years. So if you're a New York fan or a history buff, you will probably enjoy 400 Years. And then finally, listen, this is Tom Hamill's fault. I would never do this. Finally, Love Marches On is my Broadway saga in comic strips. It was published originally as a daily comic strip in 2013, and the book collects all the comics and also has a great deal of supplemental material and a lot of new writing. This second edition has been expanded significantly, and similarly, if you're interested in the Jazz Age, the history of Broadway, Love Marches On is on 2 timelines. It's Times Square in the 20s and the 70s. So it's an interesting contrast. And yeah, what can I say? I recommend this one too, believe it or not. And they're available wherever timeless classics are sold. Thanks, Tom. Keaton. I assume this is Keaton Harper. Keaton is a wonderful performer in her own right, a harpo fanatic and a harp player. You can see her soon, along with some other Home Again alums, in our production of Quarantigone, our virtual Greek tragedy, which will be out soon. Anyway, Keaton Harper suggests that maybe the next big opus should be Cracked Ice on Ice. I am in, and probably right on my ass if we tried that. Oh, yes, this is a question about whether this program tonight will be available to watch later. The answer is yes. It'll be on YouTube as a regular YouTube video at the same link, and it'll be available there until the end of the world, which should be in a few weeks. Can you translate one of the movies into Spanish? Yeah, that's a very interesting question. I know the movies have been translated, at least in the form of subtitles. I also know that translating Marxian humor is a huge challenge. Because how do you make those puns work in another language? You need a brilliant translator who is also a comedy writer on a level that they could create material worthy of the Marx Brothers. But most of the puns wouldn't work. So that is a job I can barely even wrap my head around how someone would do that. But perhaps the asker of this question can figure it out. Certainly, there should be no barrier to enjoying the Marx Brothers for anyone in the world. Though I will say they've always had a huge following in countries where English is not the primary language. So apparently, even without the perfect translation of all the wordplay, there's still enough to fall in love with the Marx Brothers. Steve Small. Oh yes, plug the podcast. This is the ideal Q&A when people are just asking me to plug my stuff. Yes, the Marx Brothers Council Podcast has been going on for 2 years now, a little more than 2 years. My co-hosts are Matthew Conium, the author of 2 great books, The Annotated Marx Brothers and That's Me, Groucho. He's written other great books, too, that are not about the Marx Brothers, so forget those. But Matthew is wonderful, and he's also, of course, the admin and creator and lifeblood of the Marx Brothers Council Facebook group, which you should all join if you're not a member yet. We do 1 podcast a month. They usually come out at the end of every month, and it's been wonderful. It's been a great way to keep these conversations going. MarxBrothersCouncilPodcast.com is where you can go to hear all 27 archived episodes and each new one as they're released. Dan asks, what is Amanda's favorite film? Again, I'm not sure if the question is Marx Brothers film. Okay, Amanda thinks it is. Well, her favorite Marx Brothers film is definitely The Godfather. I think she has told me that she's partial to A Night at the Opera. Monkey Business. She likes the boat ones. Ah, there's the lovely thumb of Amanda Sisk. The Marx Brothers movies with boats in them seem to be the ones. Although there's a boat in Horse Feathers. Jim says, did photos come from the book, the city, and the art? I'm not sure what this question means. The photo, if you mean the photos.
The City and the Theater by Mary.
Oh, The City and the Theater. Yes, you know what? It's like within reach. Oh, okay. Now I fully understand this question. The Jim is Jim R. Moore, another great friend and wonderful guy. Jim is a very accomplished photographer who specializes in photos of entertainers. And he has many projects and books on the way. And his website is Vaudevisuals, which is worth a daily or weekly check-in. The answer specifically is no. The photographs in the presentation tonight did not come from that book, but some information did. And that book was your recommendation, Jim, and thank you for it. What happened to their own memorabilia? Where is it? That's a good question. A lot of Groucho's and Harpo's papers and memorabilia are in the Smithsonian Institution. One of the most magical days in my Marx Brothers experience was in 2015. Amanda and I spent a day at the Smithsonian going through Groucho's scrapbooks and papers, and it was wonderful, and it led to a great deal of material that I hadn't found before that was able to incorporate into I'll Say She Is. So that's an answer. There's also a lot of memorabilia in private collections. Frank has a lot of that stuff. Robert Bader has some, and others among the Marx Brothers inside crew. And the National Comedy Center in Jamestown also, I think, has a couple of important Groucho pieces of Groucho memorabilia. During I'll Say She Is, did you do unscripted ad-libs? And there's also an editorial comment on this comment, which I think comes from Amanda Sisk. In this case, I believe this comment is from Amanda Sisk, not Amanda Sisk, my wife, but Amanda Sisk, the director of I'll Say She Is. The comment is, psht. That's a P, 3 S's, 3 H's, and a T. What she is telling you there is, yes, there was unscripted ad-libbing. And at the Connolly with I'll Say She Is, it was such a luxury to settle into a run and get to do it a lot of times. And as the run went on, you know, you get more comfortable thinking on your feet. You get more confident with the idea that you're on your feet thinking might somehow approximate the Groucho wit or come somewhere in the neighborhood of it. So yes, there were ad-libs. The example, I'll give one, if you forgive me, the bad form of quoting my own joke. During the run of I'll Say She Is at the Connolly, for a little while we were having this tremendous problem with the curtain. Those of you who were part of that show or who saw it on certain nights will know that there was a good week there where you just never knew if the curtain was going to open or not. And once it was open, you didn't know if it was going to close or not. And this kind of unpredictability, although I don't know that the director and crew was wild about it, the Marx Brothers among us embraced the wild unpredictability of it. And of course, it was a chance to say things nobody was planning on saying. So one night, in the opening number, a selection of the members of the chorus, they sing a few lines in front of the curtain. And then the curtain's supposed to fly open and you see the full set and the full chorus, and it has a lot of impact and would sometimes get a nice hand. Well, on one particular night, it lost some of its impact because the curtain didn't really open very much. It sort of went, and it was open just enough to see there was something going on in there. We got through the opening number through the heroic efforts of Amanda, stage manager Sarah LaHue, and the crew. They were physically holding the curtain back at both sides so that the audience could see the stage. So following that number is the theatrical agency scene. And when I made my entrance as Groucho, I looked at the audience and I said, "The tickets are $30. You don't expect the curtain to open all the way." So that was a good one. Yes, right. Oh, yes, because the subject has moved on. I paid beautiful tribute to Matthew Coniam. I neglected entirely to mention Mr. Bob Gassell. Bob is the other host of the Marx Brothers Council podcast. And what can you say? Bob is a hell of a guy. Not only does he edit the Marx Brothers Council podcast, and he is a professional editor, that's what he does. But I think, I've never said this to Bob, but I will say it here. I think if you listen to our podcast from the first episode to the most recent, you observe Bob Gassell turning into a great broadcaster. And it's wonderful. Not that he wasn't great in the first episode. He always was. And he's a very witty and funny guy. And he has a lot of great ideas about the Marx Brothers. But now he's doing circles around Matthew and me. Bob really is terrific. I love the guy. And that's why I waited to say this, because I'm a little emotional now. Oh, what is on my wall? Well, visible on my wall is... that poster is from the arena stage revival of Animal Crackers in the 1990s. The poster was a gift from Kathy Beale. It was in her home for many years, and she moved things around and thought I might like it. I think it's a great poster from a design point of view. And that production starred Frank as Groucho and Les as Harpo. I didn't see it at the arena, but when I was 15 years old, I saw both of them and much of the same personnel in Animal Crackers at the Goodspeed Opera House. And then over here, this is a prized possession. That's the sheet music from Sailin' Away on the Henry Clay, with the photograph of the Marx Brothers in the middle. That was a gift from Stuart Gelwarg, a very lovely gift from a lovely guy. And yeah, I'm so happy to have that. It doesn't normally hang here, but I thought I'd like to have it behind me for this event this evening. Also, you know, Andy Marx's performance tonight, which was so touching, and it's so generous of him to provide that for us. You know, Groucho Marx is his paternal grandfather. His maternal grandfather is the lyricist Gus Kahn, who wrote the words for I'll See You in My Dreams. He also wrote the words for this, Sailing Away on the Henry Clay. And while we were working on this, I was on the phone with Andy one day, and we were talking about Groucho and Gus and everything. I hung up the phone, and I realized I was face-to-face with Gus Kahn's name in the living room. All right. This is a request from Dan. Sing while you Gassell. Yes, I think I've made that joke myself on the podcast. I wish I could say only once, but I have a feeling I've gone to that well repeatedly. Is there anything else on the wall that... Oh, yes. This, you can't see this very well, but this is a poster. This. It's hard to point at things. The red framed thing up there, that's a poster from the original Broadway production of 1776, also close to my heart. And this is a caricature of me as Groucho by Adriano Mores, who's a wonderful artist and caricaturist and New York guy. Maybe he's watching tonight. If you are, Adriano, I have framed your work, and thank you for that. Do you think differently when Groucho? Yes, I think I do now. The run of I'll Say She Is was a real breakthrough for me that way. And I'm pretty sure it's because, as I said, I got to do it a lot. You know, I really got to kind of live in the role for a while, rather than doing short runs and weekends and cabarets. I used to feel much more like I was playing a character. But during that run at the Connolly, I did feel, and I'm hesitating because I fear this sounds presumptuous or self-glorifying. I really don't mean it that way, and I am fully aware that nobody will ever get close to what the real Groucho was capable of. And I'm also very aware that Groucho himself would not approve of any of this. That's something we all have to live with. But during the run at the Connolly, yes, I did feel like I was able to think as Groucho sometimes. And I think the best improvised moments happened when I was able to do that. The Jewish Museum event also, which there were a couple of clips from tonight, and you can find the whole thing on YouTube. You know, that was like an hour and a half of unscripted conversation as Groucho. And that was a big moment, too, as far as like trying to not just act like him, but sort of be him for a little while. Marx Brothers tie. Someone saw it once and loved it. Can't find it. Yes, I do have one. I think I have the tie you're talking about. It's way in another wing of our vast Washington Heights apartment, so... Oh, you'll never find it in my closet. Oh, what a trooper. See, this is what love is about. Amanda hates my closet, because my attitude about a closet is, if it had to be organized and neat, it wouldn't have a door on it. So I don't know if she's going to come back with the Marx Brothers tie, or with, you know... with vitriol about my closet. But anyway, I think you're talking about a blue tie with a black polka dot background. Oh my God.
It's awful in there.
She says it is awful in there in my closet. If this is the tie you mean, then yes, I do have one. I'm not sure where specifically you might find a tie like this, but in our internet age, surely a little bit of Google footwork could find it. The Marx Brothers tie. Oh, Beth Anderson and her cats liked the show. Thank you, Beth. Beth Anderson is a Facebook friend and pen pal of mine, and Marx Brothers fan, and like me, she has a soft spot for the felines. I'm very glad you liked it, Beth, and I'm especially glad the cats did. My cats, they didn't really pay attention. Mark Rabin dresses as the Hirschfeld Groucho for Halloween. That's very interesting. I would like to know what exactly that means. I would love to see a picture of a Hirschfeld Groucho costume, if you've got one. What a great idea. Oh, this is a good question, too. Wanting to know if Amanda Sisk has played Dorothy Parker. I think, as far as I know, the answer is, except for in this voiceover tonight, she hasn't really. But it has been suggested before. She is a big Dorothy Parker fan, and I believe she would include Dorothy Parker among her gallery of heroes and influences and kindred spirits in many ways. She should, shouldn't she? That voiceover was terrific. Yes, I am all for it, folks. I think we should make that happen. All right. Is that the... did I get through this pile of questions? It's so nice. Thank you for asking all these questions.
People about the Panther book and the Bader book.
Oh, yes.
How good they are. Someone asked, when is the production of Giraffes on Horseback?
Giraffes on Horseback Salad. Yeah, that was Salvador Dali's Marx Brothers project. Recently turned into a very interesting graphic novel by my friend Josh Frank. Yeah, that's a really interesting project, and it's a corner of the Marx Brothers world that is different from all the other corners. I don't know that there's a stage version of Giraffes in the works, but it probably could be a film. But that's Josh's department to develop that. Oh, the Bader and Canfor books. Yes, well, Robert Bader's book, Four of the Three Musketeers, is a landmark. It's both a landmark in Marx Brothers scholarship, and it's a landmark because it is the size of most of the major landmarks in our beloved cities. Yeah, enough joking about how big the book is. It's great. If you're a Marx Brothers fan or aficionado, surely you have read or are intending to read Robert Bader's book. It's practically a reference book. It really throws tremendous light on particularly the early stage years. And yes, I recommend it. A lot of what I had to say tonight in terms of history is stuff that I've gleaned from Bader's book. But I might mention that it's not just Bader's book. Real thanks are due to all of the people who have written Marx Brothers books over the years. And even those of us who have done some of our own research are so in debt to all the writers who have come before us. I'm necessarily going to kick myself for forgetting somebody here, but I would say off the top of my head, Joe Adamson, whose book changed my life, and it remains the Marx Brothers sacred text as far as I'm concerned. Simon Luvish's Monkey Business is an excellent book. I recommend that one too. Matthew Coniam, both of his books shed new light on things, and as always with Matthew, the writing is so excellent. You really should read them. And his second book, That's Me, Groucho, even features my appendix, which is a history, an illustrated history of Groucho's mustache. Stephen Canfor, to my thinking, the Canfor book is extremely readable and well written. It's a good read, but it doesn't particularly cast any new light on anything. It's not really a research project as much as a pleasant retelling of the story. Hector Arce's Groucho biography is essential and underappreciated. Glenn Mitchell's Marx Brothers Encyclopedia. There's a sampling. Tell that guy how to find collectibles. Talk about Paul Wesolowski. Yeah, well, collectibles. You know, the truth is, I don't know a great deal about collectibles. It's not really my area, mostly because having money to spend on collectibles is not really my area. And most of my prized possessions in this area were gifts, like this amazing gift from Stu Gelwarg. He also gave me a Night in Casablanca poster that I love. So I do have an original, I'll say she is, casino program that I bought on eBay. And that's kind of my best advice, is look on eBay, try auctions, you know. But I would certainly start on the internet to find where to acquire Marx Brothers stuff. And best of luck, you know. Talk about Paul Wesolowski. Yeah, Paul Wesolowski, also known as Wesso. He is a Marx Brothers researcher and collector who lives in New Hope, Pennsylvania, in a home which is essentially a Marx Brothers museum. And he's had open houses periodically over the years where you can visit his collection. And I've done that from time to time, or I've done that once, I should say. It's certainly amazing what Paul has done. He's also the editor and publisher of the much loved and much missed Freedonia Gazette. I was going to show you, this is in connection with the Robert Bader question about his book and about how, you know, I am in debt to all of these earlier and current writers and researchers for all the things that I know about the Marx Brothers. But this is my current notebook, and this is the notebook where I worked on most of what you saw tonight. And I have this page, it's dated August 9th, 2020, and the heading at the top of the page is Things I Learned When Getting Into Bed with Robert Bader. I'm probably the first person ever to write those words. Shay wants to know, who is this Amanda in your apartment? That is an excellent and complicated question. I think we'll have to talk about that after. Call me. Someone else says, introduce Amanda. Someone else says, Amanda, do Dorothy. Are you willing to appear on camera? Huh? Yeah, please do. I didn't want to be pushy about that. Hey, folks.
Hi. Oh, gosh.
She wasn't planning on making an appearance tonight, which is why she is only gorgeous. Amanda Sisk, folks, my partner in life and art. This presentation tonight, as well as everything I do, would not just be worse, it would be impossible without her. And by the way, since there's been so many invitations to plug, the other project we've been working on, Quarantigone, our quarantined Greek tragedy, that is very much an Amanda Sisk production, and that will be coming up soon. We won't be shy about sharing it on the socials. Have you heard The Marx of Time? Yes, I have heard The Marx of Time, a radio piece that's kind of styled on the March of Time, and is wonderful, but I haven't heard it in a long time, and I should revisit some of that stuff. Oscar wonders what collectibles you'd find in a bay. Well, seashells, very smooth pieces of glass, deflated beach balls. No, eBay, the popular internet auction site is what I was getting at there. But you never know what you'll find in a bay, and I think it's well worth taking a look. Rick, yes, this is a comment. Yeah, Rick Sansone, another great guy and great friend. Rick did a sampler comic of their story, is what this comment says. Yeah, Rick Sansone, who's a very gifted comic artist and writer, has been developing a graphic novel about the Marx Brothers' early years. and he did a sort of preview, a 4-pager, which we had available at the Connolly during the run of I'll Say She Is. I think, like all the rest of us, he's kind of hoping to raise a little money to realize his project, but I hope the full-length Marxian graphic novel from Rick is forthcoming. And I think I might be able to easily, yeah, here, this is the sampler. And a number of pieces of artwork that you saw in the presentation tonight are from this publication, generously donated by Rick. The question is, who edited this? It's so professional and beautiful. Wow, and apparently many people are saying that. Well, thank you so much, folks. I did. You know, I mean, I wear many hats. I don't know how well I wear any of them, but I do like to do a lot of things and be a sort of creative jack of all trades. So this was mostly me from a production point of view. The editing is all mine, the sound design and all those kind of film things. It's a pleasure to work on that stuff. It will also be a pleasure after tonight to go back to sleeping at night, but you know, I'm an obsessive tinkerer, and it's what I love to do. I love to work on projects and pour my love for topics like the Marx Brothers in New York City and other things into these efforts, and I love fine-tuning every little detail. And you know, if this presentation had been 2 weeks from now, I would have spent another 2 weeks making tiny changes. Thanks so much. That is so lovely to hear, and I'm so glad that you liked it. This is a comment. Jay Hopkins can't think of questions. Well, I happen to know that's not true. What? Yeah, we all love Jay Hopkins, and I think everybody watching this would agree with me. We love you, Jay. But I have to say, you're wrong. Jay Hopkins can't think of questions right now, perhaps, but on the Marx Brothers Council podcast, we have an ongoing series called the Jay Hopkins Interviews, specifically because Jay, decades ago, conducted really interesting, incisive interviews with some Marxian subjects, some of whom aren't around anymore, and Jay has never shared this audio before releasing it on our podcast. So that's another reason to check out the podcast website. There are original interviews conducted by Jay with Arthur Marx, John Goodell, the producer of You Bet Your Life. We just published one with Nat Perrin. Also Steve Stoliar, who is very much with us these days, but it's an early Steve Stoliar interview. And much to Steve's credit, his story is so straight, you know. In this early interview with Jay, he tells many of the stories that he tells in his book and in current interviews, and they're the same. He did not polish the apple, you know. That interview is a treat. And by the way, talk about Marx Brothers books, Steve Stoliar's Raised Eyebrows is a unique volume on the Marx Brothers bookshelf, not only because it reveals a view of Groucho's later years that you can't get anywhere else, but because it is, to my thinking, the first Marx Brothers book that is really written from the fans' point of view. And you relate to Steve as the narrator of this book, or at least I do, very profoundly. It influenced my writing of Give Me a Thrill quite a bit, particularly the second half, where I talk about my own journey toward I'll Say She Is. So yeah, Steve Stoliar. He also played a role in the re-release of Animal Crackers, as many of you know. So hooray for Captain Stoliar. Oh, this comment says, it's nice to have so many fans in one place. Yeah, that is one of the things we miss, isn't it? And events like this are so, you know, they just fill up the heart because it feels like we're kind of together, even though we are in separate locations. Yes, I love the Marx Brothers fan community so much, and I'm so grateful that there's anybody who's interested in what I have to say about these guys. This question is, what is the next Marx Brothers project? Good question. I don't know. The Marx Brothers Council podcast is, of course, an ongoing Marx Brothers project. I do have a couple of other speaking gigs coming up. not as elaborately technical as this one, but a couple of good talks. One will be an online version of my Marx Brothers on Broadway lecture that I did in Freedonia 3 years ago. And the other will be a piece about the coconuts and animal crackers and how they were adapted from stage to screen. Those are both coming up in October and November. And shamefully, the piece of paper where I wrote the details is not close at hand. Oh yeah, here it is. On November 12th, that is going to be, you know what? I don't, I can't even read what I was writing here. But you know what? On Facebook and Twitter and my website and everywhere else, I'm going to start posting about those now that this one is passed. So, so there's those. There's some speaking things coming up in November. And you know, I do have quite a list of Marx Brothers projects that I want to and plan to work on. Many of them will require functional theaters, but we'll see. There will be more. That I can really promise you. We will do more Marx Brothers projects and more other projects too. This is a question. California tour. Yeah, we would love to do. I'll say she is in California or anywhere, if that's the question.
California landmarks.
Oh, California landmarks of, oh yes, that's also a good question. Yeah, I mean, obviously the Marx Brothers did spend a lot of their years in California, and you could indeed do a great Marx Brothers tour there too. I don't know if I'd be the one to do it because I don't know LA the way I know New York and, you know, in Beverly Hills. And but somebody could actually, offhand, I would nominate Scott Alexander, the wonderful screenwriter, co-writer of so many great biopics, including the unproduced Marx Brothers biopic that we all would love to see someday. Scott is a buddy and a Facebook pal and a podcast guest, and he's been posting these amazing before and after photographs of locations around Southern California, you know, what they looked like in the past and what they look like now, which is very much the kind of thing I'm always doing in New York. So maybe Scott Alexander is the West Coast guy to take on something like this.
What can you find in a bay? He said.
What can you find in a bay? The answer, of course, is a sturgeon. Chico would say, that's a doctor, cuts you open when he is sick.
Give Oscar for that.
Oscar...
He asked the question, he answered.
Oh, Oscar asked that question. I know who Oscar is.
Answered it.
Oh, and he answered the question too. Thank you, Oscar, and it's been nice to see you, Oscar, around the Marx Brothers Council group lately. Tanner Sykes. Tanner Sykes is a recent pen pal of mine who lives in Chicago, which is another city where you could do a Marx Brothers tour. Tanner, maybe we should make that happen. His specific comment here is that he isn't sure if I like the Marx Brothers. I don't want to, you know, be too committal here, but they are definitely growing on me. How do you get to Mount Carmel? Practice? No, that's Mount Carmel is in Queens. I got there the easy way by calling a car service. In fact, I called the Carmel car service, which is a coincidence. Anyway, yeah, it's only about a half hour from where I live in Washington Heights. But you can get there on mass transit too. It's just you got to jump through some hoops. It's like 2 trains, a bus, and a walk. I'm sure I'll go back there sometime though. It was very moving to be there, and it was especially moving to be there with Seth. I will visit again. Also at Washington Cemetery in Brooklyn, there are some other Marxian graves. Grandma Fanny Schoenberg is there. And from what I understand, Manfred Marx's grave is there too, but it's been overgrown and it's kind of hard to find or see. So I didn't get to do that this time around, but that's on my list. Oh, thank you for sharing Kathy's insight. Yeah, well, thank you to Kathy for sharing that. Yeah, you know, Kathy, what can you say? She is so many things. Talk about wearing a lot of hats. But one of the things Kathy does is she is like an oracle of Marxian philosophy. She sees a lot in them that I hadn't seen myself, or else if I had seen it, I just hadn't articulated it so well. Their motivation is joy. You know, I was just giving Kathy, we were at the Connolly Theater. It was, I think, during like Hell Week, during Tech for I'll Say She Is. And I was saying to her what I've said millions of times about, you know, the Marx Brothers aren't sentimental and their work isn't about necessarily ingratiating themselves to the audience, and yet we feel so sentimentally about them. Why is that? And Kathy said, she thought about it for half a second, and she said, well, their motivation is joy. Yeah, that was a good one. All right. Oh, staged readings during pandemic. That's a question. Yeah, I do think we will do more of this kind of thing while this is going on. And the virtual theater stuff, although it is missing, of course, the most important thing that makes it theater, which is a group of people together in a room, it's been lovely and touching. And I think we've all been a little emotional these days because of what we are all going through. But I've been tremendously moved, sometimes even to tears, by the way, you know, we're going to find a way to put on a show, you know, whatever it is, a pandemic through Zoom or whatever circumstances you put us in, you know, even in the worst of times, we're going to get up in front of each other and tell each other stories and make each other laugh and play music. And it's making me kind of emotional now. Art finds a way. That's what I like to say. Art finds a way. And yes, I do think we will do more, you know, maybe panel discussions, staged readings, virtual theater, and other things. It feels vaguely like a new art form too, which is kind of exciting. Robin asks, what books talk conservatorship hearings? His brother-in-law was a defense on the case. Yeah, there's a lot of good detail in Steve Stollier's book, if you're interested in the court battle that followed Groucho's death. That is not the happiest part of the Marx Brothers saga, but Steve Stollier's book has a lot of good stuff in it, much of which is his firsthand account. Also, Hector Arce's book is very good on that stuff too. Mention Bob. Oh, I already mentioned Bob, but let's do it again. Bob Gassell.
Do you still do tours?
Do I still do tours? Well, tour guiding hasn't been my full-time job in quite a long time, but I do occasionally still do it, yes. Just last summer, I did a whole bunch of Marx Brothers themed New York City walking tours. Perhaps many of you who are watching now attended. I had a great time doing that. I hope you did. And that's something I would definitely be interested in doing more of. I also did some double-decker bus tours, which is really kind of my, the double-decker bus kind of is my instrument as a tour guide. I like doing walking tours, but double-deckers, you know, that's work in the big room. And unfortunately, it's not quite what it was back in my salad days of being a tour guide in the late 90s and early 2000s. But I did do some part-time double-decker tour work in 2018, and I still enjoyed it largely. It still has its magic. What I'd really like to do sometime, and I might as well just say this, here's a Marx Brothers project. I would like to charter a double-decker bus and do a Marx Brothers double-decker bus tour. That's something I haven't done. And that would allow you to cover in one tour some of the farther flung Marx Brothers locations. Like we could do Yorkville, and then we could also go out to Astoria, and we could also do the Midtown Theater District stuff and the Lower East Side. And yeah, let's do that after the pandemic.
How did you perfect the mustache?
How did you perfect the mustache application? You know, I have to say, this isn't false modesty. I haven't perfected it. Every time I've applied the mustache, I've had to work on it. You know, I'll do it once. I'll look at it. It doesn't seem quite. That corner should be rounder, shouldn't it? And I always get it to what I think is right. But it's a project. It's an art project. I say this in full knowledge that there is another Groucho impersonator who some of you may be familiar with, who is pretty good at grabbing a stick of grease paint in the dark and going, and he looks like Groucho. I guess maybe it's from doing it thousands of times, but I'm not there yet. I haven't done the makeup in front of an audience, so I haven't been motivated to do it fluidly, but for me, it's a real process, and it sort of feels, I like that it's a process. Transforming into Groucho, for me, maybe it shouldn't be too easy. It should be work to get yourself to that place. Anyway, that's my answer to that one. The mustache application.
Nice haircut.
Well, this is just so moving that there are so many questions. I was hesitant to do the Q&A because I thought nobody wants to ask me a question. Why hasn't Minnie's Boys been revived on Broadway? Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think, to be candid, I think Minnie's Boys needs work. And there is a great show in there, but I think it has its problems. I think both the book and the score could be worked up into something a little truer to life and also truer to the spirit of the early days of the Marx Brothers. That's not a knock on Grossman and Hackaday and Marx and Fisher, who did a great job writing Minnie's Boys. I think that was the show to create at the time. But I think a Marx Brothers bio-musical now would be deeper and richer, and I don't know if the answer to that is a revamped Minnie's Boys, or if that would even be possible, or perhaps a new musical on the same subject. But yeah, it should be done, and I don't mean to knock Minnie's Boys too much. It does have its pleasures, but anyway, I think that's the answer. It doesn't jump out, except for the Marx Brothers reason. It's not a musical that cries out for revival on the basis of its high quality. That's what I would say, privately. A Hard Day's Night at the Opera mashup. The Beatles and the Marx Brothers, there is a kinship there, and many have pointed this out. A Hard Day's Night at the Opera, we have had Mikael Uhlin, my dear friend in Sweden. Maybe he's watching tonight. I don't know what time it is in Sweden. Maybe he's watching this morning. But Mikael, who is also just a key part of my Marx Brothers background, a very early supporter and collaborator on the I'll Say She Is project, and the father of the Marxology website, which is hosted by Stefan Timfus, who also deserves a lot of praise for what he does for the fans with his site, marx-brothers.org. He also hosts Mikhail's wonderful Marxology site, and also the great and pioneering Marx Brothers website, Why a Duck, which was founded and edited by the late, great Frank Bland. So Mikhail and I have often had these Beatles, Marx Brothers conversations where we say things like this to each other, A Hard Day's Night at the Opera, and many more. My favorite of those was, Everybody's Got Something to Hide Except for Me and My Monkey Doodle Doo. Is there a Zeppo equivalent in the Beatles? Well, I don't know what the answer to that is, because you have to define Zeppo. I mean, I guess the easy answer that many might venture, but I wouldn't, is that maybe Ringo was the Zeppo because Ringo is sometimes perceived as kind of the lesser member of the quartet. But I don't see Ringo that way. I see Ringo as everything you could possibly ever want in a rock drummer, a glittering, wonderful, funny personality, and the most relatable Beatle in so many ways. And I also am not really a Zeppo detractor, although clearly he was not quite essential in the team. I love the Marx Brothers a lot more with him than without him. So I don't know if there's a Zeppo equivalent in the Beatles. It's not a perfect analogy, the Beatles and the Marx Brothers, but there is some kinship there. And certainly Groucho and Lennon do seem to share a certain iconoclasm.
They're saying, oh no.
What's that?
Oh no. They're saying, oh no, it's the equivalent.
Oh, Yoko. Well, same thing. I'm a Yoko defender too.
Everybody knows about Star Phasers. Just what's your opinion of Lord of Horsefeathers?
Lord of Horsefeathers. Oh, I'm not familiar with it. Lord of the Horsefeathers sounds like something I would like, though. Maybe somebody can fill me in, or maybe I'll Google that myself later on. Thanks, assuming that's a recommendation.
What do you think of A Day in Hollywood, A Night in the Ukraine.
A Day in
Play.
Yeah, A Day in Hollywood, A Night in the Ukraine.
As a play.
As a play. I like it. That's a Broadway musical from the 1980s. It's pretty idiosyncratic show. It's a kind of double feature. The first act is a kind of Hollywood review tribute to MGM style musicals, and the second act is, of all things, an adaptation of Chekhov's The Bear, starring the Marx Brothers or their characters. I think it's excellent. I think the Night in the Ukraine part of that show is perhaps the best example of Marx Brothers pastiche, post Marx Brothers writing. I think it's excellent. I'm a big fan of it. How did you get the voice down? You go in and out so easily. Thank you. Thank you for that. I don't know. I guess it's a lot of listening, and also a lot of aspiration, just wanting to sound like that. I have a strange ear. I'm not an impressionist. Like, I don't have a large gallery of impressions that I do well. In fact, I think Groucho is really the only impression that I can sustain over the course of a long performance, I think. But I have the kind of ear where I can do a lot of people for like one sentence. Walter Matthau. Yeah, I mean, I am turning into Walter Matthau as I age, my wife feels. But I don't actually know that I could, over the course of a scene, convincingly be Walter Matthau. But the Groucho voice, I do think I lucked out in that it's not that far from my actual sound, although I definitely put on the New York accent much thicker. And that's one of the things about impersonating Groucho that is most important to me, is getting the New York accent right. I also think that as I've gotten older, the sound has gotten closer. I just recently did a Marx Brothers interview with my dear friend Brian Hoffman for his streaming program on Turnstile Tours. Brian played Harpo to my Groucho when we were 14 years old. And so we played a clip. It's the only time I've publicly shared a clip of that early performance. But watching myself there, I realized to my chagrin, I really didn't sound too much like Groucho when I was 14. So I don't know if it's that the vocal cords themselves are aging or just that I've gotten better at it. But thank you for that. Telling me that I sound like Groucho is one of the higher compliments I can imagine. Thank you.
I have to read this to you.
Okay.
On the subject of your Groucho impression, why is it that your Groucho seemingly is more based on the Paramount days? Was it trying to stay true to the more Broadway era or some other reason?
Yeah, thank you. The question is regarding my Groucho impression. Why is it that my Groucho sounds more like the Groucho of the Paramount period rather than the later MGM period, or perhaps the You Bet Your Life period and beyond? Yeah, it is the early Groucho. That's what I like to do, and that's what I identify with the most. And because my work as Groucho has been most prolonged and most prominent in I'll Say She Is, it made the most sense to try to get it, if possible, maybe even try to figure out what it would have been like a little earlier than Paramount. So yeah, I think that's right. I'm a 20s Groucho, a Groucho of the jazz age. In the Jewish Museum event that I showed a couple of clips from tonight, that was interesting because the conversation was career retrospective stuff, but I was pretty much playing the same early Groucho that I always play. So, it's like 40-year-old Groucho telling stories about things that happened to him in his 60s and 70s.
Charles Pierce says maybe you sounded like Groucho did when he was 14.
Oh, that's nice. Yeah. Well, whose question was that, or comment?
Pierce.
Pierce says maybe when I was 14, I sounded like Groucho did when he was 14. That's possible. I hate to say it. I thought when I watched that video that I sounded a little more like Jerry Lewis, but maybe when he was 14, Groucho sounded like Jerry Lewis.
Sansone says you're doing a great Noah Diamond right now.
Oh, that's nice. Who said that?
Sansone.
Oh, Rick Sansone. Rick Sansone says I'm doing a great Noah Diamond right now. Thank you, Rick. I hope that I'm growing into the role. Oh, well, Stuart Trister. Stuart Trister, also known on Facebook as Rodney Stewart Hillel Trister, if you want to make it easier. Um, yeah, talk about people who deserve a shout out. Trister is a fantastic researcher and Marx Brothers expert and bon vivant, and he was crucial in helping me with the research on Give Me a Thrill, and I'll say she is. And I should actually say I mentioned some of the Marx Brothers books that have meant so much to me and taught me so much, and I know we all feel that way about these books. And the authors of those books were assisted by researchers whose names aren't on the cover, but who are also instrumental in making all of that happen. And Trister is definitely one of those. Another is Robert Moulton. Robert Moulton is a great guy and a good pal, and he helped me tremendously with Gimme a Thrill. He's also assisted Robert Bader with a lot of his research. Paul Wesolowski deserves, of course, a giant accolade for helping with Marx Brothers research. Paul's never written a book, but he had a hand in almost every Marx Brothers book. And Bob Gassell, again, Bob is a wonderful researcher and contributed significantly, as did Rodney Trister, to the research for Matthew's Marx books. Thank you for that. And are there other comedy teams you are as fond of? Well, not as fond of. There's no, I guess there's maybe no artists at all who I'm as fond of as the Marx Brothers.
And a piggyback question is, current comedy has the most obvious Marxian influence.
Okay. All right, it's a double question. Other comedy teams, yeah, there's many that I'm a fan of. I love Laurel and Hardy. I like about half of Abbott and Costello. Burns and Allen. Just Burns and Allen, the sound of their voices together warms my heart. Amanda? No. Amanda's a great comedy team. Martin and Lewis.
What other Marxian influences? Nichols and May.
Oh, yes, Nichols and May. Yes, Nichols and May are dazzling. Monty Python, for God's sake. So yes, I love many comedy teams and many comedians. But I don't think anybody is in the same league as the Marx Brothers, either as artists or in my heart, you know. And as to the, oh, you know what I would like to add? Actually, there is one that does mean as much to me as the Marx Brothers. And also goes back to childhood. I'm not sure if you'd count them as a comedy team or just an entertainment entity. But the answer is the Muppets. I think the Muppets actually, on the original Muppet Show and the first three films, might have gotten closer than anyone else to capturing something of the spirit of the Marx Brothers and the feeling of watching the Marx Brothers. A combination of love and laughs. So the Muppets are very important to me, and I think part of the reason I fell in love with the Marx Brothers as a kid is because they reminded me of the Muppets. And then the second part of that question was, in terms of contemporary comedy, who do I like, or who is sort of heirs to the Marx Brothers? I don't have a great answer for heirs to the Marx Brothers. I think every comedian, whether they realize it or not, is influenced by the Marx Brothers. Nobody currently jumps out at me as you know, especially Marxian more than others. Some people have said Sacha Baron Cohen. I could see maybe a little bit of the rebellious spirit, but he doesn't quite strike me as a Marx brother. I'm a big fan of his, though, and I love comedy, and I'm a big fan of lots of current stuff. But except for the Marx Brothers just being in the DNA of everyone who ever tries to get a laugh, I'm not sure. Their style, although as fresh as ever, is not practiced as widely as it will be before we're through. What was it like to do the Jolson Festival with Bob Greenberg? Wow. Well, first of all, doing anything with Bob Greenberg is a pleasure. Bob, I don't know if you're watching tonight, but I feel like I keep saying this, but I love that guy. I love all of these guys, and part of the pleasure of all these projects is is this extended family. Bob Greenberg, excellent comedian and performer and just a great guy and a figure of levity and warmth and good humor. Bob Greenberg and I appeared together at the Al Jolson Festival in Long Island, a wonderful event which is organized by Jan Hernstadt, or as I, as Groucho, call him, Heinstadt. Heinstadt does a wonderful job with that festival. And yeah, we did that one year. Bob played W.C. Fields and I played Groucho. And we had a great time. That was interesting to be Groucho and banter back and forth with Fields. It was good. Thanks for that question. That was a terrific event. And the Al Jolson Society that Jan manages continues onward. I assume that they are not doing an event this year, or at least not in the usual way, but hopefully they'll be back next year, and maybe we will too.
Back from Tanner. He says that Henson had Lydia played at his funeral.
Oh, yeah. Okay, this is another one from Tanner. Tanner Sykes in Chicago. Yes, true. He points out that Jim Henson had Lydia the Tattooed Lady played at his funeral. Yeah, it was one of his favorite songs, and Kermit, Henson as Kermit, performed Lydia memorably on The Muppet Show.
Project you wish had come to fruition that did not.
What project do you wish had come to fruition? Meaning which Marx Brothers project that they didn't actually complete. Yeah, there's a lot of those in the story. In fact, we dedicated a whole episode of the Marx Brothers Council Podcast to these might have beens, these projects that didn't quite happen. Tanner's suggestion is Of Thee I Sing. The Marx Brothers tried for a while to get themselves into a film version of the musical Of Thee I Sing, which is a Kaufman and Riskind libretto. They won the Pulitzer for it, or if you prefer, the Pulitzer. It's not entirely clear to me how they would have fit into Of Thee I Sing, or if they would have fit well. Of Thee I Sing really is the political satire that Duck Soup isn't quite. But I certainly would be interested in seeing that if it existed. Some others that I find interesting, I'm not necessarily saying I think they would have been great, but that UN project, Billy Wilder wanted to make a film with the Marx Brothers later on in the 50s, or it must have been in the late 50s, which would have been called A Day at the United Nations. I don't know if it would have been a great Marx Brothers movie. Matthew Coniam feels pretty strongly that it would not have been. But I'd still love to see a Marx Brothers movie made in that period with those Marx Brothers, and what would that have been like? And, Billy Wilder was the kind of director who you want to see what he's doing no matter what. So that's one. There was going to be a Groucho Sherlock Holmes musical. That would have been interesting, too. Sisk says, oh, yes. Sisk says, I am Fred friendly now. When we were planning this evening and talking about how we were going to manage this Q&A, she suggested that she would be Fred friendly, and I am Edward R. Murrow, and she's passing me little notes during the broadcast to let me know what's going on. And yeah, my desk is now absolutely covered with friendly Post-its. However, the Post-its, that is very Sisk. I don't think Friendly had adhesive notepads. Thoughts on the Ritz Brothers and thoughts on the Three Stooges. The Ritz Brothers, I have not made as complete a study of the Ritz Brothers as I should. I have seen them, but I can't comment on them with the kind of authority that I can about some of these others. It seems to me the Ritz Brothers were wildly talented guys, very magnetic, watchable performers, and just great and entertaining, but not, epic geniuses like the Marx Brothers. I think they didn't necessarily have as much mystery and substance and as much to say. I don't think the Marx Brothers were necessarily trying to say things, but they did say things. I think the Ritz Brothers were extremely capable, watchable, and enjoyable entertainers. The Three Stooges, I hesitate to say it because I'm sure I'm in the presence of many fans. I've never loved the Three Stooges. I can see the technical skill in their comedy. I can see their importance and influence. But I tend not to laugh at them very much. I have sometimes said that comparing the Marx Brothers and the Three Stooges It's like comparing Shakespeare and the Three Stooges. I hope no Stooge fans are mad at me. I don't hate them. I don't think they're terrible. Right. Innocent Bystander comic by Gary Sassaman. Do you know it? No, I don't. But
Raven says it's very good.
It's very good. There has been some discussion lately in the Marx Brothers Council Facebook group about the Marx Brothers appearances in comics. Ed Dragansky has raised that subject, and others have. And Cerebus the Aardvark, that's an example everyone is aware of and likes to refer to. I'm not familiar with Innocent Bystander, but maybe I will just have to track that down too. Oh, the question is, would you consider doing a life in review kind of play? Yeah, that's a question about the play Groucho, A Life in Review, which was written by Arthur Marx and Robert Fisher, and in its original New York production starred Frank Ferrante as Groucho and Les Marsden as Harpo and Chico. You know, it's very hard for me to leave Groucho on the table, and if any offer or invitation came along to play Groucho in a production, unless the circumstances were just impossible or otherwise unfeasible, yes, I would. I would jump at almost any opportunity to get in front of people and try to give them a little bit of what it would have been like to see Groucho. I am somewhat convinced that for Groucho to really work, he needs people to play off of. Groucho monologuing for a long night, there must be ways to do it. Some have found ways to do it, but I haven't. I haven't gotten my mind around that. So any Groucho thing I did, if it had any length to it, if it was more than just a song and a couple of jokes, I think it would have to be a play in the sense that it would have to have other characters for Groucho to interact with. But yeah, absolutely. And I also, I sort of did Animal Crackers when I was a kid, but playing Groucho in Coconuts and Animal Crackers, that's on my list too. I really hope to get a chance to do both of those as an adult someday when I'm an adult.
Please tell Rick Sansone I'm having a very good time talking about the young ones with him.
Oh, Rick Sansone, Amanda would like you to know that she's having a very good time talking about the young ones with you. And you might be talking about the cult classic television show, The Young Ones, or you might be talking about some people we know. What did you think of Mrs. Parker and the Vicious Circle? I like it. I know that there are some Algonquin and Jazz Age fans who are very critical of that movie, and I understand their criticisms. They make some good points. But I enjoy that film. I like it. I like Jennifer Jason Leigh as Parker, and Campbell as Benchley, I think does a great job. It, like a lot of biopic type films, it kind of runs out of steam at some point. The early parts where it's the 20s and it's the Algonquin, that stuff is very enjoyable. And then it does sort of dribble out into more depressing and slower periods. But I like it. I like the movie. Groucho Zoom call suggestion. Yeah, it's interesting. One of the events that I'm doing in November, which is going to be a lecture, or one of these kind of lecture events, we were originally talking about doing some kind of Groucho Q&A via Zoom. It could happen at some point. My hesitation is that it's a little hard to imagine doing like an hour and a half or an hour of spontaneous Groucho without getting to know the audience reaction. And I think one of the things that got me through the challenge of the Jewish Museum event was being able to read the room and get the laughs and know how it was going. And it's also it is so un-Groucho-like to sit in front of a computer. I wonder how into it I could get. But these are concerns, not refusals, and maybe there's a way to do it, and maybe I will.
Title, I guess, a Zoom call with Groucho.
A Zoom call with Groucho, yeah, it's a good title. A Zoom call with Groucho. How about Zoom service? We could call it Zoom service. Yeah, but that Jewish museum event was so much fun for me, and it felt like a big step in this journey. And something like that, a Groucho Q&A in person with an audience, when that kind of thing is possible again, that I would be very interested in doing. That was a real workout in the best way. Also, the clip that one of the clips from that was in tonight's presentation was, I was telling Amanda the other night, it was, in a way, it was one of the best moments of my life when I, as Groucho, did that line about "this must be the Far Rockaway boat because I can smell the herring," which is a line that's always quoted as an example of a joke that doesn't get a laugh because, it's this arcane reference. But at the Jewish Museum on 92nd Street, it got a huge laugh, and I wasn't expecting it, and yeah, the herring joke killed at the Jewish Museum. It was just beautiful. That audience also, when I talked about Gallagher and Sheen, they recognized the Gallagher and Sheen song, not as a historic artifact, but as a song that they knew and grew up with. I love the Jewish Museum. I'd love to do more of that. And the Jewish angle on the Marx Brothers is something I haven't talked about a lot before tonight, but I want to do more with that too. And I've been trying to get the attention of some Jewish cultural institutions and try to put together programs and things. Who was the first Marx relative you spoke with? Oh, that's a great question. I'm trying to remember. Spoke with is what I'm getting hung up on. The first Marx relative I communicated with was Miriam. I created a piece of artwork called Tillo Marx for the New Yorker's cover contest. The New Yorker has this recurring contest where you reimagine their mascot Eustace Tilley in some other style or form. And so I made this New Yorker cover that's Eustace Tilley, or 3 Eustace Tilleys as the Marx Brothers. And I was pleased to say it was one of the contest winners that year, so it was printed in the magazine.
On the other page.
Oh, yeah, that's true too. And then later it was used in some advertisements in the New Yorker, including one issue which placed my Tillo Marx design on the opposite page across the spread from a new story by Woody Allen. So that was a big moment for me too, folks. And ever since then, I've been referring to him as Woody Allen, my colleague at the New Yorker. Anyway, that Tillo Marx design, I guess it got some attention just because it was in the New Yorker, and Miriam Marx saw it and I guess loved it. And a good friend of hers wrote to me, I think this is around maybe 2010, about 10 years ago. She wrote to me and said that Miriam would love to have a print of Tillo Marx to display in her home. And yeah, that was my first real encounter actually with a Marx. And so that was enormously touching, and just knowing that she had that in her home and looked at it sometimes, that was big for me. Yeah, I was just thinking about that. Yeah, Amanda is reminding me. Yes, there was a very brief encounter, it's true, with Maxine, not Miriam, but Maxine, at the Goodspeed Opera House. When we saw Animal Crackers there. My grandmother lived in Connecticut. Grandma Red, who's also a New York mentor of mine, and I think my ability to do the New York accent accurately has a lot to do with Grandma Red. And Grandma used to take us to shows at Goodspeed all the time, but the one that was most exciting for us was, of course, Animal Crackers, with Frank and Les, Robert Michael Baker as Chico, Craig Rubano as Zeppo, Celia Tackaberry as Mrs. Rittenhouse, directed by Charles Repoli, or perhaps Repol. That was a formative experience for me. And while we were there, my sister Shayna went to the ladies' room, and she came back and said, I just met Chico's daughter, Maxine, in the ladies' room. And so we then got a glimpse of her and sort of waved as she was as we were all leaving the theater. I think it might be a bit much to claim to have met her, but I did see her, and my sister Shayna met her. So 1 degree of separation, perhaps. Yeah, and then as time went by, and I'll say she has got underground. Since then, I've had beautiful interactions with the great Bill Marx, one of the world's loveliest guys, son of Harpo, with Andy Marx, Groucho's grandson, who I also really just like a lot as a person. I think I would even if he wasn't a Marx. I don't know him well, but I feel like we have connected, and I've had a nice time talking to him just recently in preparing this. Andy performed I'll See You in My Dreams for Michael Feinstein's Great American Songbook YouTube channel. And I saw that video and was so touched by it. And I wrote to him just to tell him how much I liked it. And then the week after that, I was out in the city getting all the footage that you saw tonight of all the former theaters that the Marx Brothers played in. So I was out in New York looking at all these, the shells of all these vaudeville theaters, and I'll See You in My Dreams was playing in my head because I had watched Andy's video a couple of times. And so I thought I might as well ask. And so he was so generous. He redid the song. He performed it again specifically for this. And I'm so grateful to him. And I hope you all found it as moving as I did. That song with that subject matter and the fact that it's Andy performing it just gives it, even more depth. And I am so grateful for that. Is there evidence that Minnie was offered a cameo in The Coconuts? Not that I know of, and I haven't ever heard that. But and in fact, I've never seen any film of Minnie, and I believe it's established that there is no known film of her. Although, let's see what Robert Bader says when I ask him that. But I don't think she exists on film. And as far as I know, Frenchie exists on film only in that little tiny piece of monkey business that I played tonight where he's waving his handkerchief from the docks.
I have a question.
Amanda Sisk has a question.
How many versions of the Monkey Doodle Doo are there?
How many versions of the Monkey Doodle Doo are there? I will now perform 5. One answer to this is that Irving Berlin wrote 2 completely different songs, like 10 years apart, and they're both called The Monkey Doodle Doo, and they both contain that phrase, but there's really nothing else about them that's similar. I've often said that if you are as prolific a songwriter as Irving Berlin, it's inevitable that you will probably write 2 Monkey Doodle Doos, and that if you put 12 monkeys alone in a room with a typewriter, they will eventually also write the Monkey Doodle Doo. On YouTube, there's a little piece of my Marx Brothers on Broadway lecture where I talk about the Monkey Doodle Doo and talk through the lyrics and really dig in deep on the Monkey Doodle Doo for anyone who feels that's what their life has been missing.
Did the real-life warmth make them more likable?
Did the real-life warmth between the brothers help make them likable and relatable? I suppose so, and I think... Well, I think the Marx Brothers are somewhat different from many other entertainers in that they don't seem to have gone out of their way to be likable. Not unlikable. I mean, they're not assholes. They're not like renegade comedians who spit in the audience's face, nor are they completely ingratiating entertainers. However, that aside, I think the truth in this question is very apparent. Yes, I think the fact that the Marx Brothers are brothers and the fact that they are called brothers has a lot to do with our feelings about them, or certainly with my feelings about them. I am very close with my siblings. I love my siblings. I have a younger brother and sister, Joe and Shayna, who I grew up with. And then I have 2 sisters who came along later, who I love just as much, Liz and Stephanie. And so siblings has always been a big part of my life. And specifically, my siblings, especially Shayna and Joe, because that's when I was a kid, they've always been my stock company, or at least they were before they decided to, make their own decisions in life. But, when I was a kid, I was always putting on plays, and my brother and sister just obliged me. I wanted to do Fiddler on the Roof in the living room, so Joe had to be Fruma Sarah, Laser Wolf, Mottel, and Yenta the matchmaker, and Shayna had to be all 5 daughters and Golda, and so that's what we did. And anyway, my feelings about siblings and the warmth of sibling love, I think, does have a lot to do with why the Marx Brothers mean so much to me. And I do think the love among the brothers comes across on the screen.
And someone said Gummo.
Jay Hopkins says, oh, mention the rumor that Frenchie was in opera. Yeah, you can find in some internet locations, you'll find statements that Frenchie appears in A Night at the Opera. He doesn't. I think that got started because of the boat thing. In Monkey Business, Frenchie appears in the scene when the boat is arriving in New York, and there's a shot of people on the dock waving to greet the boat, and Frenchie is one of them. He's wearing a white hat, he has a black mustache, and he's waving a handkerchief. And I think because there is also a boat arrival in A Night at the Opera, someone conflated it and wrote about it, and that's how these things get started. It's also been widely circulated that Frenchie appears both on the boat in Monkey Business and on the dock waving at the boat. And that would be a very satisfying Marx Brothers occurrence, because it's like he's waving at himself. But as far as we can tell, he does not appear on the boat, or at least I haven't been able to spot him, and neither have Bob or Matthew or any of our colleagues.
Lots of people want this question.
If you could ask him one question and know you'd get an honest answer, what would you ask? Well, if I could ask Groucho one question and know I'd get an honest answer, what would you ask? Boy, it would be a shame if I couldn't come up with an honest answer to this question. One of the things that I am most curious about with Groucho is how much he enjoyed the work. Because, you know, so much of what we know about him personally tends to dwell on his discontent. I do not think Groucho was a miserable, unhappy person. I also think it's been overstated, the idea that he was sort of a nightmare to live with and abusive. From what I know, that's going too far. He was difficult, he was prickly, he was grouchy, but I think he had a big heart, and I think he had a lot of love in that heart. I think his love for the people in his life was obvious and well known to those people. But a lot of his personal expressions are expressions of cynicism and discontent, and I just wonder, I don't doubt that he loved performing, that he loved his work. There's also no questioning his obvious drive and determination to succeed over and over again. But I'd like to know if he loved it and how much, and in what way. And, you know, at this point, I'm very familiar with what it feels like to pretend to be Groucho Marx, but what did it really feel like? I'm sure what I would ask him would be something along those lines, and that would be really a hard question to answer, even if he was determined to.
Dave has asked, did Frenchie play the manicurist? And everybody's enjoying that.
Dave Sapp? Sicula. Dave Sicula asks, or comments, that Frenchie played the manicurist in A Night at the Opera. Yeah, that's an in-joke for Bob Gasol fans.
Monkey Doodle Doo in the shower.
Oh, apparently Tanner Sykes in Chicago sings the Monkey Doodle Doo in the shower.
I like that.
Thank you for that, Tanner. I sing the Monkey Doodle Doo in the shower in New York. So maybe we'll try to do a duet sometime, but in separate showers is what I'm saying. Have you met anyone from the BBC Flywheel revival? Only online. But yes, I love the BBC Flywheel revival. And yeah, those guys are terrific. And it's available. You can find it online. There's also a CD that recently came out that has all of the BBC Flywheels. That's well worth listening to. It's terrific.
Do you ever worry that you'll run out of things to talk about on the podcast?
Do we ever worry that we'll run out of things to talk about on the podcast? I wouldn't say I worry about it, but it does stand to reason that at some point, we may exhaust all the things you can say about the Marx Brothers. But I don't know, it is an amazingly vast and deep and rich subject. I'll tell you that every time we do a new episode, we usually have a conversation about what the topic's going to be, and we kick around a number of ideas. So, there is currently a list. We'll see. And, new projects can refresh that too. As new things come along, like Josh Frank's Dolly book, or perhaps another revival of I'll Say She Is, those kinds of things, or new releases. Night in Casablanca is coming out on Blu-ray soon, so we'll probably do an episode about that. Can you give a hint about the next topic? Yes, I think I can, because I think that Bob Gassell has already given some hints about this. We have been trying for a while to coordinate with John Tefteller, who is a real great Marx Brothers guy who worked for Groucho as his audio archivist and has subsequently become the keeper of a tremendous archive of Marx Brothers audio, including radio appearances that basically nobody has ever heard. And John has been promising or threatening for a long time to release a set of Marx Brothers radio stuff that I imagine will be a revelation in the same way that Robert Bader's Shout Factory DVD set of the Marx Brothers on television was. Anyway, there is still no launch date or anything like that for John's collection, but we've been trying to get him on the podcast, and we've been talking to him. There's a chance that could be the next episode. And then pretty soon we'll be continuing our deep dives into the movies. I'm trying to space those out because there are so few of those movies, but I think A Night at the Opera is our next deep dive, and that'll probably be before the end of 2020.
Great question from Joe Jolis.
Yeah, Joe Jolis.
Who do you think played Groucho in the dark in
Oh yeah, that's one of the great mysteries. Who do you think played Groucho in the dark in Animal Crackers? I don't know. Matthew Coniam is the one who can answer this question the most thoroughly. People have often suggested that it's Zeppo. It's really not Zeppo, and it's kind of obvious if you just look at it or turn the brightness up. It couldn't be Zeppo. I think people think that because of the story, which is true, about Zeppo sometimes understudying Groucho on stage. I believe Matthew's informed theory is that most likely the guy playing Groucho's role in the dark in that scene is Groucho's stand-in. And I think Matthew narrowed that down to who that would have been. But as far as I know, the evidence is inconclusive.
He also wants to know who you think do you think Harpo's singing in Monkey Business?
Oh, in Monkey Business. Is Harpo singing in the barrels in Monkey Business? Yeah, that's also one of these, perennial questions. I have always felt that he was not singing. I've never felt sure, but, whenever I've listened to it and thought about it, it's always seemed to me that he's not obviously singing. And, we know that he was, he maintained his decision not to speak pretty zealously, although there are a couple of TV appearances where you can find him whispering something to a co-star to prompt a bit. But I tend to think Harpo maybe wouldn't have. However, Andrea Orlando, hi Andrea, if you're watching tonight, another great Marx Brothers fan and the life of the party over at the council. Andrea, who is a musical mind and a music teacher, she has extensively diagrammed the vocals in that Sweet Adeline piece, and she feels very strongly that Harpo is singing. She has a very specific idea about when he comes in and when it's Seppo and when it's Chico. And only because she has worked harder than I have on figuring this out, I might lean toward her opinion a little bit, even though it wasn't my impression.
Did you like Brain Donors?
Brain Donors, yeah.
Do you like it? How do you feel about it?
Do I like Brain Donors? Well, listen, I think when you need a brain, you need a brain. And whether you like the donor, that's not the question. Brain Donors. Brain Donors is a Marx Brothers style movie that was made by the Zuckers and the Abrams, the guys who made Airplane and The Naked Gun. And it stars John Turturro, not doing Groucho, but in a Groucho-esque role. Yes, I do like Brain Donors. I guess I'm not quite as big a fan as some. I remember liking it when I was younger, and then seeing it fairly recently. We watched it with the 2014 cast of I'll Say She Is. On that viewing, I didn't like it as much. I'm not sure why. I came away feeling like it missed the mark more than I had thought. But I guess I'd have to watch it some more to really get an informed and be articulate about it. I do like it, and I do think it's a good idea. It's a good way to do it. There's the approach that I like to take in my own work sometimes, which is like be the Marx Brothers, recreate them, do the show the way it would have been done in the 1920s or as close as possible. But it's also very interesting, and in some ways maybe more interesting, to just sort of take the essence of the Marx Brothers and build something else out of it. And that's what Brain Donors is, and I think it's a very good conceit.
I'll give you 3 things really fast.
Okay.
Tanner says maybe I should be doing Q&A instead of you.
Yes.
Are you a fan of Mae West?
Yes.
And then Brett wants to know what's your favorite song from the movies sung by the brothers or not.
Oh, okay, great. Wait, what was the first one again?
Fan of Mae West.
Oh, am I a fan of Mae West? Yes, I love Mae West. I would put her in the same category that I mentioned before with other comics I love, like Laurel and Hardy and Burns and Allen. I mean, not on a Marx Brothers level, but I think she's one of the best of the rest, for sure. And then, you gave me 3 questions at once. Oh, Tanner suggested that maybe Amanda should be doing the Q&A. Yeah, there's really no doubt about that. Maybe if the public demands it. And Brett wanted to know, Brett Leverage, I assume that's Brett Leverage. Brett Leverage, I love you, Brett. You heard Brett's voice tonight as Horatio Alger. You also saw Brett's face and probably heard his voice on your way into the Connolly Theater, if you saw I'll Say She Is, because he was our house manager. And no better gatekeeper for that world. Brett's question is, what is my favorite song from the movies, either performed by the brothers or not? I would say my favorite song performed by the brothers, I really like Everyone Says I Love You. It's a great song, and I love the way it's performed by each of the 4 brothers separately. So that could be my answer. Whatever it is, I'm against it. / I Always Get My Man also ranks extremely high on my list. And the songs not sung by the brothers, The Monkey Doodle Doo, of course, and also Why Am I So Romantic?
I think Harpo may have done well if he wasn't replaced by Alan Young and Androcles and the Lion.
Yes, Harpo appeared, or was to appear in Androcles and the Lion. I don't know. I assume he would have been good. Harpo did, after the Marx Brothers' career especially, sometimes experiment with different kinds of roles. He did the Yellow Jacket with Wilcott. And he also did The Man Who Came to Dinner. He played the role of Banjo, which is based on him. Boy, I would have loved to have seen that. I guess the only thing I've really seen, which is Harpo playing a markedly different role, is Silent Panic, the TV piece, Silent Panic, which is quite good. He's very different in that, and he's kind of a little creepy and scary, and so I don't know. I don't have a lot of evidence to answer that question with, but I suspect that anything Harpo did would have been magical and captivating. Speaking of The Man Who Came to Dinner, I was thinking about Louis J. Stadlin and his great work as Groucho in Minnie's Boys and elsewhere, and also how nice it was that I guess he's the one guy who did Groucho who actually got a chance to have Groucho respond to his performance. And Groucho did say some lovely things about Stadlin, and boy, that must have meant a lot, because that's not a guy who paid you a compliment if he didn't mean it. But, you know, Stadlin then went on to this glittering career. He kind of left the Marx Brothers behind, but he went on to this amazing career on Broadway and film, and he's played a wide range of roles. He's versatile. He's funny. He's a tremendous performer, and he played banjo in the revival on Broadway of The Man Who Came to Dinner with Nathan Lane, I think in maybe around the year 2000, and he was terrific as banjo. But because he kind of played Harpo in that, and he played Groucho in Minnie's Boys, I think Stadlin, we can add him to the very short list. I think the list goes Les Marsden, Louis J. Stadlin, of the guys who have successfully and expertly played more than one Marx brother.
Okay, celebrities only. It would be terrible, but who would you cast in a remake of Animal Crackers?
All right, the question is celebrities only, and with the qualification that it would be terrible, but who would I cast in a remake of Animal Crackers? Well, let's see. It's been pointed out that Michael Cera looks like a Marx brother. He does look like a Marx brother if you look at that face of Michael Cera's. I could see him possibly being a good Harpo. Let's see, Chico. Who could play Chico in among current celebrities? I don't know. It's really hard to answer. If the question is like doing an accurate Chico impression, that's really hard to answer. If it's more of a brain donors kind of thing, conjure the essence of Chico, I don't know, maybe someone like Pete Davidson.
Pete Davidson.
Yeah, because he's street smart. Chico has this kind of streetwise quality. Yeah, that's probably not a great answer. What's that? And Groucho, God, a lot of Sacha Baron Cohen's name comes up a lot. He's a great talent, and I love him, but I don't know. First of all, he's so tall, which automatically makes it a little something, and then not that he couldn't play Groucho successfully, but in what I've seen him do, he does have this kind of deliberately and brilliantly way over the top, dialed up to 11 vehemence that I don't associate with Groucho. You know, it's one of the surprises with Groucho is how quiet he was. He's often remembered as this loud, manic, frantic force, and he did that sometimes. You know, he did have those moments. But most of the time you watch Groucho, he speaks softly, he moves slowly. I think maybe that's why it does have so much impact when he does go over the top. Anyway, that's a non-answer to your question. Give me 2 weeks. I'll come up with a great Animal Crackers cast for you.
B. Drogan points out that it's a 1 hour show and a 2 hour Q&A.
Yeah, this has been a long Q&A.
Are you a fan of silent comedians? Chaplin, Keaton, Lloyd?
Am I a fan of silent comedians? Well, the nice thing about a long Q&A in this form is we're all at home, right? So you can turn me off anytime. I may be all alone right now. And no, I obviously not, because questions are coming in. Anyway,
to make you feel better.
Unless Amanda's making them all up to make me feel good. Yeah, we'll just do this all night. She and I, this is what we do. We do a Q&A sometimes after dinner. Silent comedians was the question. Am I a fan of silent comedians? Yes, I am, but not quite as much, which has nothing to do with a judgment of silent comedy. And many of my film buff and comedy buff friends, you know, to them, silent comedy sort of is comedy, and everything after 1929 is a compromise. I think because I am so intensely verbal, I do prefer dialogue, you know, and physical comedy is great too and has its place. And part of what makes the Marx Brothers so rich is that they offer both. But it takes a lot for me to pay attention to something that doesn't engage me verbally for an hour or two. I really have to concentrate hard on silent comedy. But I do. I love Chaplin with a passion. There's a big space for Chaplin in my heart. Keaton, I don't love quite as much, but I recognize that he was even better than Chaplin in many ways. I love the Laurel and Hardy silence. So yes, but not quite as much.
We are winding down.
We are winding down. Well, perhaps if one more comes in while we're wrapping this up, fine. But
or if I've missed one.
Or if one has been missed. But perhaps we've done it tonight. You might want to see before we close this up what's come in here. These are all the questions. Look at this. This is quite. Oh, you know what? This is probably making the microphone, like we should have wet these questions like in coconuts. Anyway, well, that was lovely too. Amanda was saying earlier, like, oh, you should do a Q&A. I was saying, but what if people don't want to ask questions? It'll be embarrassing in a live stream to end it with like, okay, well, good night. Boy, was I wrong, and boy, was this touching, and boy, was this fun. And I just can't say thank you enough to every one of you for watching, every one of you who's not watching live, but hopefully will enjoy this later. And once again, I just want to say a special heartfelt thank you and send all the love available up to Freedonia. As much fun as this has been tonight, I do wish we were up there this year, and I do look forward to being back there perhaps next year, the year after that, or the next year after that. So thank you especially to Cindy Yoakum for making this happen and for giving this gift to all of us. And I also just want to say hi to Seth, who came with me to Mount Carmel. That was kind of a last-minute plan, and boy, did it work out well. And I think what we did there was so much more than it would have been if I had tried to do that alone. Oh yeah, please. Would you like to
Just say bye.
say goodbye on camera? Or you're telling me to say goodbye?
Say goodbye.
Yeah, please do say goodbye.
Thank you, everybody. I would have put on makeup if I had known.
Me too. All right, brothers and sisters, let's call it a night. But let's do this or something like this again sometime soon.